Okay, my name is Stefan Asturian, and I am the director of the Turpanjan Institute of Social Sciences. I am happy to see here many colleagues, some friends, and especially quite a few students, which is something very meaningful to me. Before starting the conference, I am very much pleased that our provost, AUA provost, has agreed to say a few words, and I would like to invite her to the podium. Dr. Alina Rarapegyan.
Good morning. Good morning, honored guests and beloved colleagues and students. Welcome to the American University of Armenia and to this timely, ambitious international conference, the South Caucasus Along Fault Lines, Regional and International Perspectives, hosted by the Turpanjan Institute of Social Sciences. I'm sure I speak for my colleagues at AUA in saying that we are especially pleased to welcome our international participants who have traveled to Yerevan to join this vital conversation on the South Caucasus and the evolving global landscape. This conference marks a significant milestone, not only as one of the most substantial academic gatherings on international relations to be held at AUA, but also as a testament to our university's growing role in fostering rigorous, regionally grounded scholarship with global relevance and global reach. I'm proud to witness the vision and vitality with which the Turpanjan Institute has stepped into its role as a leading research institute, creating synergies with AUA's graduate programs in international relations and diplomacy and public affairs. Together, TISS and these graduate programs reflect our institutional commitment to becoming a key center for the study and practice of international affairs in the South Caucasus. The topics under discussion at the conference across these 2 days, ranging from the geopolitics of the South Caucasus to the challenges of diplomacy, security, and regional integration, are of critical importance to Armenia and its neighbors. For our students, the conference isn't just an academic event, but rather an immersive learning opportunity and a call to intellectual engagement, and one hopes a call to future intellectual leadership for Armenia and the region. My most heartfelt thanks to Dr. Stefan Asturian for his vision and leadership in conceptualizing and developing this conference, and to the hardworking faculty and staff, the team of people whose support was indispensable to the success of this conference, for all their labor of love that has helped our gathering materialize today. I wish you all a stimulating, productive, enlivening conference. Welcome to the dialogue on the region's future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Provost Rarapegyan. Honorable members of the Armenian Parliament, some of them are likely to join. They have a special session, apparently. Honorable members of the Diplomatic Corps, dear guests, and dear AUA colleagues and students. Welcome to the conference of the Turpanjan Institute of Social Sciences at AUA on the South Caucasus along fault lines, regional and international perspective. This conference brings together former diplomats, scholars, and analysts from almost all countries or supranational units such as the EU, significantly relevant to this region. However, sanctions against some Russian institutions, such as MGIMO, have generated legal uncertainty that has resulted in the absence of a Russian expert in this event, something which I regret. There is a Chinese, it is said it is a Chinese imprecation or curse, may you live in interesting times. Actually, apparently it was Owen Chamberlain who said something like that. I hope you agree with me that we are living in actually very interesting times. In this context, this conference might not be untimely, as both the political and economic world orders are in crisis at the same time, which is extremely unusual. And this has obviously consequences for the South Caucasus. While the outcome of the Ukrainian conflict is still unclear, tensions in and around the region are more than clear. The post-Soviet unipolar moment, a moment of perhaps excessive enthusiasm, is now challenged. Some medium powers' appetite has grown. Some small powers have evolved into free electrons, and their aging politics causes intermittent unpredictability. The South Caucasus, historically a zone of contact between and among various imperial civilizations, Persian, Slavic, Turkic, religions and denominations, Apostolic Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, Shia Islam, Sunni Islam, and ethno-linguistic groups, is an area where both conflicts and tensions are nowadays visible. The South Caucasus has also been historically and is currently a strategic crossroads linking Central Asia, China, India with Western Asia and the seas adjacent to it. Today it is highly significant for various transport and commercial projects originating precisely in Central Asia, China, and India. The South Caucasus finally is at the front line of tensions between democratizing countries, Armenia and Georgia, and what some have called their surrounding illiberal authoritarian axis, made up of various regime types. The goal of this conference is to assess the current situation prevailing in this region from both a regional and international perspective. Among the many issues that are likely to be discussed, one could mention the endangered prospects for continued democratization in Georgia and Armenia, the lack of resolution of the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict and its possible limited resumption, the relative weakening of the Russian grip over this region, or at the very least, its metamorphosis, the growing Russian-Azerbaijani rapprochement, if not strategic collaboration, the growing role of Turkey, the pragmatic collaboration not devoid of tensions between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Russian Federation, the attempted expansion of the EU's influence, and obviously the differing roles played by more distant powers such as China, India, and the United States. Armenia itself is confronted with various choices, a policy of reluctant or enthusiastic, depending on the people involved, policy of reluctant or enthusiastic reliance on its historical patron, the Russian Federation, despite their recent past, a policy of equidistance toward the main actors in and outside the region, a policy focused on regionalization and what one of our speakers has called corridorization, or attempts at getting closer to the West, assuming the latter is still a unitary actor. None of these orientations are devoid of serious risks. All will be difficult and demand time. I hope you will find the discussions of these and many other issues, as well as the diverse, if not divergent, views of some of our speakers, interesting. In one of his plays, an 18th century French playwright has one of his characters state the following: "He has no good heart, he who is tired of gratitude." He is actually right. This conference would not have taken place without two generous donations, that of the Turpanjan family, who have done so much for AUA, and in this specific case of Miss Lori Muncherian, and also that of the late Edward Messerlian and of his spouse Virginie, whose sons Mihran and Narek have upheld the promise of their father. I am deeply grateful to them. Finally, I certainly wouldn't have a good heart if I failed to recognize the remarkable work of two AUA staff members, both multitaskers extraordinaire, Miss Annie Shahoyan and Miss Teresa Avedissian. My sincere thanks to both. Sur ce, as they say in French, I will kindly ask the speakers of the first session to join me and take their seats so that we can start this conference. Thank you. I'm sure you have read the agenda, the program of the conference, and most of you might have visited also our website. Turned off. Yes, can you? Hello. I am checking whether it turns off. No, it's good. Okay, we are going to keep the introductions short in order not to lose time, as the biographies of the speakers are online and you can access them anytime. So this is for the whole conference. This first session is devoted to international perspectives about this region. The first speaker is Mr. Zohrab Mnatsakanyan, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Armenia, and also somebody who has spent close to 30 years in the foreign ministry. So he is a living memory of the trajectory of the Armenian foreign ministry. Mr. Mnatsakanyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asturian, and I'm really very happy to be here at this conference as a very important manifestation of the capacities, the potential that the Turpanjan Institute has, and that Dr. Asturian indeed has injected fresh blood in the Institute, and I genuinely look forward to see this platform as an important contributor to our collective thinking. And of course, it's a challenge to be the first speaker, and in a way, the challenge of setting the tone is, one may say, an opportunity, and especially that we are going to discuss some very complex issues in the context of living in interesting times, although when Timothy Garton Ash mentioned to the Chinese their own saying, they were surprised that they have such saying. And what I'm going to talk about is twofold, and I will set my time to make sure that I do not abuse your attention. And the two sets of issues that I will try to touch in this 20 or so minutes concern the overall environment, the global environment, within which smaller states find themselves, and Armenia is one of the members of that more or less 100 small states in the global arena. And the second set of issues I would try to focus on are about our specific region of South Caucasus and the realities which Armenia is coping with, has been coping with over the past 4 years now, and is bound to carry on with coping so long as Armenia is breathing sovereignty and independence. And a more disciplined and structured way of my reflections I tried to put in a long essay that maybe some of you might have seen, some of you might find time to see it. It's a long piece, but I would say it's a more disciplined way of reflection than what happens over the panel in the panel. So it was published in March in EVN Report, and most of my reflections here will be resonating with that piece, with that essay. And of course, given the flexibility of the format, I would reflect on the way in which we, Armenians of my generation, have entered this important historical phase of renewed independence in 1991. And I often say that I belong to that generation in their early 20s, generation of naive optimists, because we were overwhelmed and enthusiastic about the opening opportunities of the what one very prominent gentleman called the end of history, and the beginning of the era of liberty and freedom, and putting aside the confrontation of the post-Second World War bipolar world. And interestingly, I found in my life that enthusiasm was present in every, in our generation, in every other corner, whether it was on the eastern side of the wall or the western side of the wall. And we were not very happy to find the rather more wise, prescient people who were reminding of history and reminding of the pressures of geopolitics. And it was more, convenient for us to reject this and to believe in the bright future. But there were people who were warning quite vocally, in a way that they were recognizing this new phase as a transitory phase in this disturbed global order at the time. Now, when you look back, you realize how wonderful it was to be a naive optimist, and how difficult it is to find yourself on the wrong side of your optimism. And these 30 years, I believe, happened to be that transitory phase from one world order to the other, especially now that there is so much terminology involved about the transitory phase from the unipolar world to some sort of an other world. And it involves significant risks. The other day we were reflecting on one such person, E.H. Carr, Edward Carr, who has his famous book about the 20-year crisis in the interwar period between 1919 and 1939. And when you look at it, you feel like, are we in that 30 years crisis phase that we're going through? And the terminology, the vocabulary, the mood is very much in the global discourse, is very much directing your thinking in that way, which is a call for pessimism, but also mobilization. And it is also from the perspective of a smaller state, which brings me to my main point, that the global order and polarity are all about poles and all about the magnitude of the institution of great powers on the course of international relations. Some people prefer to call this phase as a transformation to a newly to the multipolar world. Some say no, it's rather bipolar world of the two great powers of China and the United States and Russia. Some others insist it's a partially unipolar world because the U.S. is still unmatched. Whatever the taste, whatever choice there is, the polarity means is interpreted in the context of the spheres of influence, circles of influence, which have front lines, fault lines, colliding circles. And those happen with the periphery, which is made up of the small states. And the crisis that has been generating over perhaps the past 20 or so years, with the crisis of the established institutional foundations of collective security, reflected first of all in the United Nations Security Council, where after the Second World War, we all agreed, or we at the time, Armenia, were part of the superpower, but the rest of the world agreed that the security is delegated to those 5 powers within the Security Council, reflecting the realities of the time. One of the fault lines is the mismatch of realities and the challenge to collective security as we know it. The institution exists, the effectiveness of that institution is significantly challenged. I rather see with a significant dose of skepticism the potential for the reform of the Security Council. But it has become a challenge to sustainability of security, global security, as we have known, as we have been aiming collectively, the world aiming after the Second World War. The others, you all very well know, the others concerning the proliferation of centers of power, the reformatting of the global South, the new realities that obviously are making a very significant impact on the reformatting of the global order. The globalization, migration, interconnectedness, connectivity, technological progress, they have created realities which effectively generated counter-reactions, which we're going through today as well, the counter-reactions so far. Pullback, nationalism, retrenchment. The list is long, but we are going through this significant transformation in which the periphery is exposed to the known in history condition of the risk of a bargaining chip. And this is where I think we Armenians are most cognizant about and most focused on. Our history has taught us that cognizance towards resisting the role of a bargaining chip when you are part of the global reordering. And I do believe that multilateralism is one of the greatest benefits that the small nations are hugely reliant on and dependent on. It is challenged, but it is the important foundation for the smaller states for collective bargaining, for checks and balances, for mitigation of the pressures of the institutions of great powers, and promotion and reliance on normative foundations, on norms, on rules which sustain that code of conduct. And multilateralism is not just the United Nations. There are multiple forms of multilateralism which have been proliferating, in fact, in so many ways. And when you think in these terms about where we are here in Armenia, I think there are basically two sets of challenges that we're facing. The one set is immediate. It is now. It is a matter of maybe weeks, months, a year or two, and that those challenges are risks of an existential nature. I think we would be naive to rule the option of escalation of war out of our agenda. These are, of course, very significant issues that Armenia is coping with, and I think we will have more opportunity to reflect on it at a session, at a panel later in the afternoon. Whereas at the same time, there is a question of a longer-term thinking, a longer-term positioning of Armenia as a nation which copes with reality of geography, and reality of regional geopolitics. And that reality is detectable very easily. It is obvious. It is a region which is made up of three regional powers: Russia, Turkey, and Iran, and the three countries of the South Caucasus: Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. The three regional powers have a long history of regional competition, rivalry. In the South Caucasus. The three countries of the South Caucasus are share the same sort of longitude of re-established sovereignty of 30 plus years, but they have been very lousy about generating a sense of common identity amongst the three of them, unlike the experience of the Benelux countries or the Nordic countries, the Baltic countries. And there have been different perceptions of security in the three countries, and the different attitudes towards managing regional rivalries of the three powers in a way that such policies are also contributing factors, not to mitigate the rivalries, but to instigate more. Disturb the balance within the region in favor of one or the other with their policies. So, an example of Armenia is one such, a contribution to the disturbance of the balance of power. Other countries have their own examples, but over-reliance, over-dependency on one regional power in a condition of absence of relations with another regional power is basically a contributing factor to instigating, deepening rivalries. And I reflect on the point of the bargaining chip. The smaller states, the vulnerabilities of the smaller states are very, sharp in such conditions. We paid the price. That instigates in my head that concept of regional equidistance, the way in which Armenia is capable to develop relations within the region in a way which has an element of equidistance with the three regional powers. a contributor to the balance and harmony rather than the opposite. It's a hugely challenging act because the realities are not necessarily in favor of successfully, conducting that line of policy. The one I mentioned was the question of relations with Russia. The other is the absence of relations with Turkey. Whereas in my view, the one relation we have with Iran is a very interesting sort of example of the way in which it is possible to sequester the bilateral relations from the other challenges, regional or global, and sustain that necessary level of engagement with our southern partner in a way which is a very effective balancing act. But the realities of relations with Russia and Turkey obviously are of a significant challenge for Armenia. They need reformatting. The question of relations with Georgia and Azerbaijan are in the same context of the way in which these three countries could recognize their collective vulnerabilities. And in this context, I believe relations with Georgia are of specific strategic significance in terms of the depth of interdependence between the two countries, given history, realities, compatibilities of threats, challenges, of political models, and so on and so forth. The relations with Azerbaijan are perhaps the most complex, nuanced, and most dangerous in that the risks of escalation, the capacity, the depth of the animosity that has been generated over these decades is not going to dissipate immediately. And of course, one has to understand that there are different priorities or different ways, approaches that the two countries are demonstrating in relation to the relations, the bilateral relations. Unfortunately, amongst other things, we were performing the role of a useful enemy for Azerbaijan, the useful enemy in terms of the sustainability of the dynasty. We are in a condition where the disruption of the balance out of the 2020 war is making the giddy heads in Azerbaijan rather encouraged to push to the maximum and to get the best, squeezing out the best out of this present condition. To what extent this, this will go is exactly a context which defines the risks of escalation. With all that said, I would rather have a few more minutes, which I would want to also focus on one final question. I was basically walking through my essay backwards because I believe, in order to pursue a reasonable capacity of sustained survival, sustained security, the choice, it hinges on the capacities of national resilience. And here I focus on the question of identity of Armenia. We are a nation well known around the world as a very ancient one, old one, with very distinct ethnic, religious, linguistic, cultural, philosophical identity. And then there might be a question, and then why do we need a state? we have been very successful to protect that identity in conditions when we were deprived of sovereignty, of independence. So the political part of our identity, I think, is an extremely important question for the consolidation of the national capacity to act as a sovereign state and to sustain its political independence. The collective freedom as a national identity, as a value worthy of protection, I argue, is an important aspect of national security. In the same context, I argue that extension of freedoms in the same context, into the organizing principle of our societal life, individual freedoms are of equal significance. In which, in these conditions, the notions, the policies, the objectives of democracy, rule of law, and human rights are not just platitudes and trivial notions, but aspects of national identity. And it is in this combination that the defense of national identity incorporates the aspect of political identity. That it is defense not of our ethnicity and religion and language and culture and philosophy and so on only, but also of our freedom. And from that, as I'm saying, I was walking backward. But from that defense of a collective identity, I detect that priority of promoting regional equidistance so far as the regional powers are concerned, and promoting policies within the region which consolidate the capacities of the three nations as actors in international relations, in regional affairs, benefiting from the geographic position of the region collectively. And from that, I'm also thinking of the rippling circles of Armenia's foreign policy, in that it incorporates the regions, the neighboring regions, which are the natural extension of Armenia's and the region's geographic participation in global affairs. I have come to my limit, and I will stop there, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Perfect timing, Mr. Mnatsakanyan. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mustafa Aydin, who is a professor of international relations at Kadir University in Istanbul and the president of the International Relations Council of Turkey. He is a very well-known analyst of the region. He will be speaking today about the impact of global and regional changes on Caucasian geopolitics.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you also for the invitation. It's nice to be here at this auditorium at the university. For some reason, it seems that my connections to Armenia has always been through think tanks, even though I'm an academic. This time is the first time that I'm in an Armenian university environment, so thank you for that as well. I'll try to design my speech as well also in two lines. One is about the global developments, and one is about the regional developments, how I see them, and finally try to come up with explanation of or expectations for the future geopolitics of the region. So when I look at, and I follow very closely what the minister has said, and my speech, I think, going to reflect quite a lot similar lines. When I look at the global changes or recent changes, Of course, the first thing that I have to consider is the systemic transition since 1990. And the minister also already quoted, called 30-year crisis of EHCAR. It seems that we are beyond this crisis moment. It's continuing. And I look at the historical changes and transitions of between international systems in the history. And there is no period similar to current period that we are in. Historically, the changes between systems happen between like 10 to 15 years. The transition periods is like 10 to 15 years. This is the first time that we are, first time in last 600 years, I would say, we are experiencing a transition period for more than 30 years. This is 35 years already. And that makes me wonder whether this period of transition is the new system. And we might not be entering a new system with all its settled rules and regulations. This is, of course, as we all understand, why we are talking about the system, is that system provides rules of engagement, and everybody knows those rules and act accordingly. Without those set agreed engagement rules, the danger is always more conflict and more warfare. Maybe we are moving into that kind of a stage in this international relations at the moment. It's already 35 years, as I said. And there is no end is being seen. And of course, the debate about the type of an international system that we are moving is endless now. We have debated everything so far as we can understand from the perspective of international relations. We are much beyond a unipolar world, obviously. It's no longer discussed. Multipolar world, some people still argues that we are moving multipolarity, but again, the number of people who are defending this position is declining by the day. There is a debate, of course, that we are moving to a new type of a bipolar world, but we all know this is definitely different than the Cold War era. It's not the replication of the previous Cold War. So maybe our tools to explain this international system through the polarity argument is lacking. Maybe we need new tools to understand what's coming. And that's a challenge, I think, an international challenge, but it affects everybody's mindset, and of course it affects the regional politics also. In this kind of a great debate about the systemic changes, the regions like Caucasus is slipping from the global perspective. There was a moment in recent past where Caucasus was the focus of international politics, however brief it was. But now, when you look at the international debate, Caucasus is not there, not anymore. Whether this is a good or bad, I don't know. We can discuss, we should discuss it. But the more importance is today is about debating where are we going, and more importance about the debate of connectivities all around. Caucasus may be part of that debate of connectivity, but that's it. No more global attention to the Caucasus, which personally I always find it's better. If you don't have global attention, you can tend to your affairs yourself. And if there is a global attention, that means global interest of bigger powers, which always becomes complicating. But nevertheless, that's my position. The second characteristics of global developments is that seemingly endless and unending multiple crises. Some people call this era as the multiple crisis era, reflecting on that. When you look at it, there is everything becomes a crisis. We have now ecological crises going on, although Trump doesn't accept that and refutes it. But we live in a region we were in Georgia a few months ago, and then we went to a wine vineyard, and the person, the chef, taster, explained to us that the environment has changed so much that Georgian winemaking is changing. And in 30 years' time, the countries that we used to see as big winemakers like Spain, Italy, and France might not be able to produce as much wine, and then the countries like Norway in the northern Europe might be producing wines rather than other spirits because the environment is changing rapidly. And we are seeing that in Turkey. We all live it personally. So whether Trump believes it or not, it doesn't matter. There is this continuing global ecological crisis. There is a health crisis. We stopped talking about it soon as the COVID passed. But there have been numerous occasions of outbursts in the different regions of the world since 1990s. Of course, they didn't reach to the level of pandemic, and we didn't notice them. But there were several epidemics, especially in Africa and Asia. And there are predictions that new pandemic, one type of another, might hit the world in the next 10, 15 years. Okay, this might look alarmist to you, but I have been reading before the COVID-19, I have been reading the warnings of academics that a pandemic was coming, and it did came. So this time, maybe we should give more attention that this kind of warning is there. New pandemic might be coming soon. And there is this financial economic crisis which seems never end. It started with the end of the Cold War, and it's going around the world. It doesn't stop. There isn't this inability of solving this economic and financial crisis. We seem to contain it in some part of the world, then it emerges in another part of the world. So we are living through this kind, and the intensity is much higher than previously. Right? The crisis that supposed to contribute to the emergence of the Second World War, the crisis of 1929, is very small event if you compare it to the financial crisis that we are living through nowadays. So we are having much more depth to the international financial crisis than any time in recent history. On top of this, we have this political crisis all over the world. We all noticed, it's part of it, the rise of populism, right-wing populism, mixed with nationalism in different parts of the world, a weakening of democratic credentials for every country, almost every country in the world, economic nationalism. The tariffs is just Trump's tariffs is just one manifestation of this rising economic nationalism. The last time we saw this economic nationalism, it was before the First World War and the Second World War. So, again, very ominous development all around. And finally, we have something that we don't know exactly what it means, artificial intelligence. We all try to understand what it is, but we really don't know how much it's going to change our life. And I happened to be in a meeting where some of the leading AI developers were, and they were all worried. They were developing this AI, but they were very worried that how this is going to develop. And we still don't have any legal or moral framework to contain it and explain it. So all this is happening at the same time everywhere. And this is kind of, it looks like unending multiple crises. You solve one, there is something else, and nothing is finished. Of course, we have to talk about, when we are talking global, we have to talk about impact of Trump 2.0. And we were just talking here, it's like as if we feel that as if it has been already like 5 years of Trump in politics. It's already only 3 months, not even. He has exhausted every one of us. He looks like a unending hurricane, right? challenging the system, not only in the United States, globally, disrupting it, and etc. But if you just try to understand what he's trying to, among all this disruption, is of course there is a very clear wish to focus on Asia Pacific. We all see it. It's not new. Of course, it has been since there in last few presidents anyway. There is a disengagement from traditional American interest areas that has developed in the 20th century. So the United States wants to focus in different areas. There is a disruption, of course, but also maybe destruction of the final parts of the international system that created by the United States. The reason is sometimes the administration itself doesn't explain it very sufficiently, but the real reason is that the US has found it increasingly that the system that the US created in the 20th century is now serving to the challengers of the United States leadership in the world. So it's not only the Trump administration. I look back like 2-3 administrations, and this was the rudimentary tools were there already. They were complaining that the system is not working or etc. But what they really meant was the system is working for the other countries, primarily China, but also other countries, and they are using the system to challenge the US supremacy. So the US critically wants to change that system that it created. The problem is that we don't know what kind of a new system, what type of a new system that this administration wants to establish instead of the old one, except maybe a kind of a 19th century imperial power struggle. There are, of course, that worries me quite a lot because after the 19th century imperial struggle, we had 2 world wars. I'm not saying that we are heading to 2 world wars, but that's a worrying parallelism. Looking to the regional challenges within this global, regional changes within this global changes are fascinating also. So regionally, we have been seeing Russian revisionism and aggression in its neighborhood. That's very clear, and it's not new. Again, especially the Europeans suddenly discovered Russian revisionism in 2022, but those of us who are working and living in this region knew it since 2008 very clearly, even before. But 2008, I think, should have been wake-up call. It wasn't, but anyway. But now we know there is this Russian revisionism, and we don't know where it's going to stop. The second is, it's not, again, many people are noticing, but the development of Russia-Iran axis with its own problems. Of course, the axis is not without the problems, but it is developing strongly and connected maybe to other countries who are dissatisfied with the current international system. But for the region, this axis might have repercussions. And the third regional change is kind of a declining Western engagement with this region. Again, whether this is good or bad, it's debatable, but it's very obvious the West has been disengaging from this region, and I don't see any time soon that it will be re-engaging to this region. There is a possibility of Turkey's enhanced engagement with the region. As I said, possibility. The problem is that Turkey is occupied itself by itself. We are dealing with so much domestic issues, but also, of course, some of the international issues which has been domesticated also, like Syria and the future of Iraq and others as well. So with so many issues that is taking attention, there is not much energy left to create further engagement with the regions like Caucasus when there is no conflict going on. If everything is quiet, it's good news, it seems to be. And of course, again, regional change after the war, the Second Karabakh War, the no peace, no war situation between Azerbaijan and Armenia is a big change and regional change. The negotiations for peace deal was important, and I take it very seriously that two countries, without the interference of third parties, were able to come with an agreement of peace deal. But signing that would be another challenge, and that's something separate. And also the final change and recent change, I would say, the exploration of regional countries, every one of them, with new international connections. The Georgia, away from the European Union and closer to Russia, we don't know exactly where this is going to lead, but that's very clear, we have seen. The similar move from in Armenia, away a little bit from the Russian orbit, maybe trying to closer to the European fora. And Azerbaijan's so-called three-dimensional exploration with Russia, Turkey, and now increasingly Israel also. Now, for the first time since the independence of these three Caucasian countries, Israel is becoming an important actor here in this region as well. So what all this means for the geopolitics of this region? First of all, the more engaged external players would be, I think, Russia and Turkey on the first tier. I don't put even Iran on this tier because Iran has its own different limitations and problems, and it's never been that much a player in the Caucasus, even though they might not like I'm saying it. But I think Russia and Turkey would be on the first tier of this engaged external players for the foreseeable future. On the second tier, I would put China, EU, and Iran here. China maybe for the first time, but we are seeing that China has been engaging more and more, not much on, of course, political side, but definitely on economic aspect. But that will have, more important, that will have political consequences. I'm quite sure about that. Regionally, individual countries might have individual connections like Armenia and France, Azerbaijan and Israel. These might also be important developments for the future. But I would assume that US will not be returning anytime soon to the Caucasus. Any kind of a deal that US and Russia would able to do over global perspective or over Ukraine might include written or unwritten understanding that this neighborhood is much more on the realm of Russia rather than the United States. So I don't expect US is coming anytime soon here. The same could be said to Europe, not out of unwillingness, but inability. Europe is interested in Europe. Another soul-searching moment for Europe, and I will expect that it will continue for some time. It will remain distracted, and the debate for the new European security architecture will consume all the energy of the European Union and the European actors. They will not be able to be more focusing. Although I noticed, and I'm sure you did, the last weeks of the EU Central Asia summit, the first summit was quite important, but I think that will not really have any expectations for this region. And I would also put Turkey here, and Turkey will remain distracted for the foreseeable future by itself and by its developments in its south, Syria, Iraq, and maybe Eastern Mediterranean. It comes and goes. These issues will take much of Turkish energy. The result will be that geography here will remain fairly stable. So the good news, I don't expect big war and conflict or hot war in near future. No sudden change in that sense, at least for me, expected in this region. But geopolitically, the region will remain secondary interest for global and external actors. However, geoeconomically, the region might become an important linchpin connecting China, Central Asia to Europe through this region. And in that sense, this middle corridor might get more and more attention. However, there might be a kind of a competition where exactly this middle road is going to go through. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, 3 countries might be competing each other. In that sense, Turkey also might be competing with Georgia about this road. And this is something new. Regionally, things to watch, a few things to watch for the future is the first I put domestic evolution of Georgia. How Georgian domestic politics will evolve, have repercussions for this region's future. Democratic credentials or not, it's quite important, and it will determine where Georgia end up with closer relations, Europe or Russia, which will again have geopolitical importance for the region. Again, the second is, I think, Armenia-Azerbaijan peace deal, not because it's finally would be there, but it's also has become a condition for normalization between Armenia and Turkey. That's why also it's more important to have this and watch. Third is possible Russian comeback. I'm quite sure, many people question this, but I'm quite sure once Ukrainian situation is dealt with, one way or another, Russia will not be containing itself within Russia and kind of trying to rebuild itself. It will be looking new adventures. I'm not going to say that these adventures would be another invasion of another country, but I can see and imagine that there would be retribution for some of the politicians who have behaved with impunity against Putin and Russia in recent years. Right? That might include Armenia and its prime minister, but it might definitely include some of the Central Asian leaders also. So Russia will come back, and it will upset the delicate balance already established as far as the Caucasus is concerned between Turkey and Russia. And I think I believe there might be more competition rather than cooperation between Russia and Turkey in the Caucasus future. And finally is finally two things is the possible spillover effect of possible negative developments in Iran, US, Israel triangle. We really don't know exactly what's happening there. We know now there was a piece in New York Times telling us that, of course, something very obvious, we all knew it, but it's just confirmed that Israel and Netanyahu have been pushing the United States and Trump administration to act against Iran and strike Iran. And Trump himself says that, not now. Okay, not now means that it might happen sometime. And we don't know how that kind of a event will play out, but definitely it will have an important impact on the Caucasian geopolitics, because the last time United States looked to this region, Caucasus, it was not because of the Caucasus' sake. It was because of the Afghanistan and the Middle East. They saw the Caucasus as a kind of a stepping stone to these regions. So if anything is going to happen in Iran, this region might again attract US attention, whether again good or bad. And finally, we have to look, and we have participants in this panel, and he might explain to us the impact of growing Chinese inroad in the Caucasus. This is not much attention is paid to that, and not much analysis really, both within the region or external actors, what this means for the regional geopolitics. What it means, for example, the opening of Anaklia harbor, or for the region and for the regional countries. So final word is that I expect nothing too exciting for a while, but a constant, slow oscillation of the Caucasian countries between different actors, trying to find their step. Nothing exciting, meaning that no war. That's, I think, a good news, and I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Professor Aydin. I was a bit depressed this morning, but your analysis of ongoing and possible crises really inspires hope. So I feel better now. I'm glad I attended this conference. Yeah. Our next speaker is Mr. Arman Melikyan, extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador of the Republic of Armenia and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh. I am very happy he is participating in this event. His talk is entitled The Local Conflicts and the Global Changes.
Dear Mr. Asatryan, dear participants, thank you for this opportunity for exchanging views about what's going on now in the world. But let me start from very far. Every person in one way or another is a participant in a single global geopolitical process that determines the vector and content of development of human civilization at any given moment of time. This process is inseparable in time and space and is characterized by the fact that the patchwork anthroposphere of the Earth, which was formed some 45,000 years ago as a result of the start of explosive migration of Homo sapiens, when there was almost absolute relative isolation of individual human communities from each other, began to convert into a territory of constant interaction, sometimes to peaceful coexistence, more often to mutual subordination and or destruction. The results and impact of that explosive process of human migration are reflected in the daily life of humanity even today. If only because certain races were assigned specific, initially relatively isolated areas of residence, territories of initial intraracial ethnogenesis. The separate and virtually contactless existence of individual civilizations predetermined the parallel development of several mutually independent geopolitical processes. With the end of colonization and the development of the entire land area inhabited by man, separate processes merged into one. At present, we are dealing with a single geopolitical process of development of connections, interactions, and mutual influences on the scale of all mankind. In this case, one should proceed from the fact that the geopolitical process is objectively irreversible, and the return of any segment of human society to any of its previous states is impossible. Therefore, it is pointless and counterproductive to try to use as a model an ideal what has happened already been gone through. At the same time, one should also bear in mind the very fact that all forms of interaction within both individual human communities and within the framework of all humanity are subject to strict laws that underlie the unique ability to think and speak inherent only to Homo sapiens. It is this ability that is the foundation of all forms and levels of interspecific competition and the conflicts it generates. It must be recognized that humanity is currently experiencing a period of dramatic events and fundamental transformations that affect the basic foundations of life for billions of people around the world. What is happening can be briefly described as a struggle of a small group of states to form a new configuration of interstate military, political, and economic relations designed to ensure for one of them the right to a further relatively long period of comprehensive global dominance, while others expect to gain better prospects for significantly increasing their level of security through a qualitative change in the adjacent security environment that existed until recently. interaction with which contained constant existential and other threats and risks. In this regard, the main events of organized violence that ensured the progressive nature of the process in the last 20 years took place in the Middle East, the Southern Caucasus, and Ukraine. And although the process of large-scale transformations is still gaining momentum, it already makes sense to evaluate the intermediate results and try to model the path of its further development. Middle East. The region witnessed the successive collapse of the regimes of Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, and Bashar al-Assad, while the wave of the Arab Spring severely battered and weakened Egypt and affected a number of other Arab countries. In essence, the collapse of the most militarily powerful Arab states occurred, which positioned themselves as enemies of the State of Israel, but which at the same time possessed significant military and economic potential. Those regimes fell, and their military potential under the new authorities was either completely neutralized or significantly weakened. At the second pace, over the past year and a half, Iran's military and political influence in the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, and Syria has been undermined. And currently, the US and Great Britain are carrying out active military actions against pro-Iranian proxies in Yemen. It seems next in line is Iran itself, to which an ultimatum has already been issued by Washington and voiced by President Trump personally. All this can be added to the list of achievements of Israel, which managed, without its direct large-scale involvement, not only to radically weaken the combined military and political power of its reconcilable opponents, but also to officially and unilaterally secure the territory of Golan Heights for itself, as well as to take control of a number of other areas of Syria. Israel has received and continues to receive direct military and political support from the United States and Great Britain. It is obvious that outside the sphere of propaganda rhetorics, it has reached mutual understanding with Russia and Turkey, and there is also a close military and political cooperation with Azerbaijan. The current new military political alignment in the Middle East region has a negative impact on China's ability to effectively support the protection and promotion of its own interests there. South Caucasus. For approximately a 30-year period, the most important factor shaping the security environment in this region was the Republic of Artsakh, unrecognized by the international community and better known as Nagorno-Karabakh or the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. The republic was established within the jurisdiction of the Soviet Union on September 2, 1991, and included the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Region and some other adjacent Armenian populated areas. Official Yerevan refused to include Artsakh in Armenia proper, and on September 21, 1991, held a referendum on independence without participation of latter's population. Neither did the Armenian authorities recognize its international legal status after the declaration of independence of Artsakh in early January 1992. Thus, Armenia positioned itself as a state that protects the rights of ethnic Armenians of Artsakh, but does not lay claim to its territory, and even refused, through recognition of latter's independence, to predetermine its legal status. Azerbaijan's attempts to bring Artsakh under its control by using force were not successful at that time. The war unleashed by Baku only led to the loss of significant territories. In May 1994, with the mediation of Russia and an indefinite indefinite ceasefire was concluded that was supported by the international community. The final settlement was to be achieved exclusively by peaceful political and diplomatic means through the mediation of the co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk group, represented by 3 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, Russia, the United States, and France. Although the co-chairs have repeatedly stated that the conflict cannot have a military solution, Azerbaijan undertook military aggression and, with the support of its allies, in 2 stages, in September-November 2020 and in September 2023, respectively, achieved the elimination of the statehood of Artsakh throughout the territory of its proclamation and the expulsion of the entire Armenian population. It can be said that along with the citizens, their statehood was also expelled. However, the topic of this presentation does not concern the fate of the Armenian population and the statehood of Artsakh, but the very conditions, causes, and consequences of what happened in the context of the interests and actions of the states that initiated and are currently actively involved in the process of reformating the military, political, and economic configuration, in essence, of the entire Eurasian space. From 1829, the entire South Caucasus became part of the Russian Empire, and until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, was a territory directly controlled by Moscow. After the dismantling of the USSR, the independent statehood of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia was restored and recognized by the international community. Meanwhile, 3 unrecognized state entities were established in Abkhazia, Artsakh, and South Ossetia. Nevertheless, if the issue of Abkhazia and South Ossetia was turned into an instrument of military political pressure of Moscow over Tbilisi, and in this sense was more related to the sphere of bilateral relations, the problem of Artsakh was key from the point of view of maintaining the Russian military presence in the region and its enormous political clout on Baku and Yerevan. Moscow recognized the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which in essence had almost no effect on the level of Russia's influence in the region. Moscow has not recognized the independence of the Republic of Artsakh, and during the Azerbaijani military aggression of 2020, it positioned itself both as a strategic ally of Armenia in words and as a strategic partner of Azerbaijan in deeds, which in practical terms resulted in non-resistance to the build-up of Turkish and Israeli military presence in the area of its until then exclusive responsibility, and the infliction through the joint efforts of Ankara, Baku, and Jerusalem of a military defeat on the Armenian self-defense forces of Artsakh, as well as the political capitulation of its strategic ally Armenia. A small part of the territory of Artsakh remained temporarily populated by Armenians as the Russian peacekeeping contingent took on the task of ensuring security guarantees. While having consistently spoken out sharply against the intensification of Ukraine's relations with NATO, Moscow itself in September 2020 allowed NATO member Turkey to provide direct military assistance to Azerbaijan and then officially insert its military presence on the latter's territory. In September 2023, Azerbaijan attacked Armenians remaining in the area of responsibility of the Russian peacekeeping contingent, and with the latter's complete inaction, forced the people to leave the land of their ancestors within a week. In the aftermath, the Turkish side repeatedly stated that it was Turkey that Azerbaijan owed its victory in Artsakh. Instead, Russian expert circles believe that without Russia's support, Even the joint efforts of Azerbaijan and Turkey would not have been able to defeat the Artsakh Defense Army in 2020. It is obvious that the fall of Artsakh has not strengthened Moscow's position in the South Caucasus, as the Russian military presence on the territory of Azerbaijan has been completely curtailed after the exodus of Armenians from Artsakh, and trust in Russia in Armenia has been significantly undermined. Moscow, which has always been able to tenaciously hold effective levers of influence in this region, has almost voluntarily and rapidly surrendered its traditional positions. What happened with Artsakh apparently was a result of a fundamental change in priorities in Moscow's foreign policy, stipulated at some point with the full engagement of Russia in the process of global redistribution of the world order. It does not seem to me an exaggeration to say that the process of liquidation of Artsakh, which lasted for 3 years and was implemented in 2 stages, became the trigger for the start of 2 other large-scale military actions, the initiators and indirect participants of which, in one form or another, guaranteed each other the provision of full support of a military, political, economic, and other nature. An analysis of the chronology of events allows us to assume that the process of defining as well as recognizing and supporting each other's priorities was brought to a practical level in the second half of 2016, when, after a period of acute confrontation in Syria, Russia and Turkey reached mutual understanding and established fairly effective cooperation there. During the same period, a dialogue between Israel and Russia was initiated as well on the Syrian issue. The military presence of the United States on the territory of Syria harmoniously fit into the overall picture of mutual understanding that was developing between the above-mentioned players. Summarizing, as a result of the war in Artsakh in 2020, out of approximately 12,000 square kilometers of its territory, Azerbaijan occupied almost 10,000 square kilometers. Control over the remaining territory with the consent of Baku was temporarily entrusted to Russian peacekeepers. Ukraine. A year and a half later, Russia introduced troops into the territory of Ukraine, starting a special military operation there, which very soon escalated into a full-scale war. The US and EU have introduced and continue to expand economic sanctions against Moscow and are also providing financial and military technical assistance to Ukraine. Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Israel did not initially join the anti-Russian sanctions. Turkey and Azerbaijan have become reliable transit countries for the export of Russian energy resources and other raw materials, as well as the import of sanctioned goods into Russia, and interaction was also carried out in the area of banking services too. At the moment, a direct consequence of the war in Ukraine has been the closure of land communications linking Russia with EU countries. The entry of Finland and Sweden into NATO has completely isolated Russia from Ukraine's Western European allies by land, but not only Russia. Thus, the land transit of goods from China to EU countries and in the opposite direction through Russia was blocked, which, according to various sources, accounted for approximately 90% of land transportation. That is the large-scale Chinese project One Belt, One Road, aimed at organizing land freight transportation along internal communications in Eurasia that are not controlled by the US, has lost its functionality in Russia. Thus, it is possible to make a logical assumption that, having agreed to the establishment of Azerbaijani-Turkish control over almost 85% of the territory of Artsakh, at the first stage of its surrender, Russia received a Turkish corridor and Ankara's loyalty in the matter of the war in Ukraine. The presence of a peacekeeping contingent in Artsakh provided Moscow with the opportunity to reverse everything if Turkey and Azerbaijan refused to fulfill their commitments to Russia. By agreeing to the gradual liquidation of Artsakh, Russia, of course, put the vital interests of its ally, Armenia, at risk. In return, it received certain guarantees regarding the war in Ukraine, the opportunity to incorporate a significant part of the latter's territory, and to strengthen its position on the Black Sea. However, the impact of its actions have hit China's current economic interests and ability to implement its strategic plans, and not only. Israel's participation in the liquidation of Artsakh led to a significant increase in its influence in Azerbaijan and consequently to a qualitative transformation and growth of military political threats to Iran on its northern borders. Due to the very close multifaceted relations that have developed between Iran and China, it can be stated that the threats addressed to Iran, again almost directly, affect the interests of China and generate serious risks for the launch and full functioning of the southern branch of the transport corridor in the communication system of the One Belt, One Road strategy. Literally a week after the expulsion of the Armenian population of Artsakh, in early October 2023, the Tzahal, Israel Defense Force, began an operation in the Gaza Strip. The official goal of that military operation was declared to be the elimination of the Hamas group's governance and structures there. The formal pretext was the Hamas attack on a number of Israeli border settlements, the killing of numerous civilians, and the taking of more than 250 hostages. The Israeli operation in the Gaza Strip was being carried out in a scenario very similar to the Artsakh one. It is noteworthy that both Baku and Jerusalem characterized their actions as anti-terrorist operations. The only difference is that Israel received a compelling reason, the Hamas attack, while Baku did not need one. The goal is to expel the civilian population from the territory of residence and to conquer that territory. In Artsakh, that goal has been achieved. In the Gaza Strip, the task is more difficult. There are 2 million residents there, while in Artsakh, at the time of the expulsion, only 120,000 Armenians lived. This may lead to a longer time frame for the expulsion of the Palestinians, but it appears that the issue of their expulsion is not subject of revision. The only question is which country will agree to accept them and under what specific conditions. However, the attack against Hamas also marked the beginning of a large-scale operation against all Iranian proxies in the region. Israel also dealt very painful blows to the pro-Iranian Hezbollah based in Lebanon, eliminating almost all of the organization's top leadership and demoralizing its ranks. Thus, as a result of Israel's swift actions, Iran's influence in Lebanon and the Gaza Strip was undermined, and the preconditions were created for the equally swift fall of the Syrian regime and the rise to power of pro-Turkish Islamist forces in Damascus. Meanwhile, on January 20, 2025, Donald Trump took office as President of the United States. He embraced the idea of expelling the Palestinians from Gaza Strip and called on Ukraine to accept the loss of 20% of its own territory for the sake of peace with Russia, and threatened that if it refused, he would cut off military, technical, and financial support. His voiced claims to Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal made it clear to everyone that the era of power politics and forceful decisions had arrived, and the concept of the inviolability of internationally recognized interstate borders had lost its relevance for the United States. However, in this way, Washington primarily supported those states that had already used force to solve problems that they considered a priority. Russia's encroachment in Ukraine, Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, and Syria, as well as subversive operations in Iran, Azerbaijan's aggression against Artsakh and Armenia, and Turkey's actions in Syria and against Artsakh are equally justified. It is okay. So, what to expect? Beijing may focus on organizing and providing a secure southern transport corridor through which cargo will travel by road and rail to Europe via Central Asian countries, Iran, and Turkey. Combined transportation with the participation of sea transport is also possible for transit through the Caspian and Black Seas. This option involves the use of land communications between Azerbaijan and Georgia. However, if the United States has really set the task of preventing the development and normal functioning of land transit communications serving China's interests, then it is quite likely that new conflicts will be launched along the probable routes for transporting goods from China to the EU countries and back. Within that context, the problem can be solved through the consistent destabilization of two key regions. Firstly, the area where the border between China and Kazakhstan meets along its entire length, and secondly, Iran and its border with Azerbaijan and Armenia. Judging by evolution of processes at the global and regional levels, it seems more likely that Iran will be the first in line. There, the goal could be to change the ruling regime with a new government allied with the US, Great Britain, and Israel, which will be ready and able to fully support plans to advance their interests in countries of Central Asia and the South Caucasus. So, thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Melikyan. I am glad I arranged the whole thing this way because the next speaker is from India and the next one is from China, and you moved smoothly towards that region. So there is some coherence. I should tell the audience that at the last moment there was a very significant health emergency in the family of Ambassador Malhotra. As a result, he will be speaking via Zoom to us. Ambassador Malhotra was the former ambassador of India to the Republic of Armenia, and he is currently managing editor of the Indian Foreign Affairs Journal. So we'll wait for the technical part of this link to be established. Hello, Ambassador Malhotra. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Good afternoon. Should I start?
Everything is clear and your sound is also good.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Suryan, distinguished chair of the session, distinguished panelists, a very, very good afternoon and greetings from India. As mentioned, I was really looking forward to being there in person and meet and interact with all of you and learn and gain from your vast experience. But as the circumstances developed, I had to cancel my trip at the last moment. My apologies. Nevertheless, thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to interact with you through Zoom. And I will be speaking very briefly on uh, the India's perspective, on the South Caucasus, purely and purely from India's perspective, how we look at it. And I have divided my brief talk into 3 or 4 segments. I think it's important to know a little bit of history so that you can do justice to your assessment of the present moments. So I'll make a reference to historical links to begin with. Then I'll switch over to the modern history of India's links with and relations with the 3 countries in South Caucasus. Then I'll share with you my own broad assessment of the region as we see it from a distance in India. Then finally, what is the policy framework, India's policy framework for this region? And finally, what are India's strategic interests in the region? So let me very briefly begin with the historical links. We have ample evidence, which is literary evidence, which is also archaeological evidence, to establish that links between India and the South Caucasus region are rooted deep into the history. There is a literary evidence, for example, which established that there were Hindu settlements coexisting with the pagan Armenians way back in the first century, 2nd century BC, 149 BC to 5th century AD. The Hindus and the pagan Armenians coexisted and lived on the territories of Armenia. Sorry. Then we have a fire temple 30 kilometers from Baku, which has inscriptions in Indian languages and also symbols of Indian religion. There are some manuscripts on palm leaf which are, preserved in Matadanaran Institute. Unfortunately, they have not been yet deciphered. Otherwise, they could have thrown much more light on the links in the ancient and medieval times. And of course, there are plenty of, evidences to prove that Armenians, Azeris, Georgians, they were present in India during the medieval period. They served in the Mughal courts. Armenians had excellent relations with the Mughals and also the British colonizers of India. And they have left behind, churches, chapels, which are preserved till date, and they reflect the glorious past of Armenian in India. So there are much more which we can talk about the historical links, but coming to the modern times, because they are more relevant, I think the modern history of India's links, relations with the South Caucasus begins obviously in 1991, when 3 countries emerged as independent states after the collapse of the Soviet Union, namely Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. India was very quick in establishing diplomatic relations, according recognition to all the 3 countries. But somehow, for some years subsequently, the region was not exactly on the radar of India's foreign policy. Multiple reasons. First and foremost, India's top priority was with the Russian Federation because the largest out of the Soviet Union. We had a lot of, lot to do to restructure our relations with the Russian Federation. Next in the priority was the Central Asia. And then also, as you all know, in the initial years, there was a lot of political turmoil, instability in the region. There were civil wars, there were regional conflicts, and many, many more things which probably prevented India to have a closer look at the region. But in the last 30 odd years, our relations have evolved, and they have evolved in a manner that today India doesn't have the kind of political understanding. If we talk about the political understanding, it is uneven. If we talk about our level of political understanding with Armenia, Georgia, or Azerbaijan, it is uneven. And why it is so? Probably it is a result of the policies adopted by these three countries at the level of their outreach to India. Of the three countries, Armenia definitely enjoys the best political relations with India at this point of time. There have been 3 visits at the level of the heads of state from Armenia to India, and 2 visits at the level of vice president from India to Armenia. Besides, the foreign ministers have met. The foreign minister of Armenia was very recently in India, in fact, to be precise, on 10th of March. And we also, I think Armenia is the only country in the region with which India has a treaty of friendship and cooperation. So I think this has been possible for various reasons. Maybe, partly because Armenia reached out to India and India responded. There could also be some extraneous factors, probably, which, for example, Pakistan factor. We have a common adversary in Pakistan. Armenia is not recognized even by Pakistan in deference to Pakistan's relations with Azerbaijan. We also had a common friend, Russia. And this could be the extraneous factors, but I think our relations have also developed on the basis of marriage on its own. Coming to Georgia, I think Georgia from the day one, I think they had adopted a very unidimensional foreign policy, which was integration with the Euro-Atlantic structures, membership of European Union, membership of NATO, and probably India was not there in their scheme of things. But post-2008 Russia-Georgia conflict, we found Georgia trying to reach out to India. They opened their diplomatic mission in New Delhi, and they wanted us also to reciprocate. But it took some time before the things could move in the right direction. And I'm speculating this could have been possibly because of our deference to the sensitivities of Russia, with whom Georgia's relations were at a very, very low level. But things have started improving. In recent years, there has been an upward movement in our relations with Georgia, and there was a landmark visit by India's External Affairs to Georgia. We have also established our diplomatic mission there, and things are moving in the right direction. So, coming to Azerbaijan, the level of political understanding between India and Azerbaijan, or interaction at the highest level, is minimal. I think there has been absolutely no high-level state visit from Azerbaijan to India or vice versa. And this speaks volumes about itself. What could be the reasons? Well, one possible reason is that it is Azerbaijan's proximity again to Pakistan. Very often, Azerbaijan acts as a proxy of Pakistan at various international fora, regional fora, including OIC, UN, etc., and sort of the actions of Azerbaijan on speaking on behalf of Pakistan are not in the good taste. And Pakistan and Azerbaijan are also forging close defense ties. This, therefore, I think is one reason which has hampered the development of relations between India and Azerbaijan. And I don't foresee any further positive movement in this direction unless there are changes at the top in Azerbaijan. So, but coming to trade, what I all spoke so far was about the political understanding and the level of political relations. Armenia leads, Georgia, things are improving, Azerbaijan, there is a stagnation. But as far as trade and economic relations are concerned, uh, these have been left to the market forces. They are not linked in any manner with the level of political understanding we have with these countries. So, therefore, it's on kind of a autopilot. And now coming to, so far, what I have said is about a broad, pen picture of our relation to each of the three countries. And as I said, with Armenia, we have excellent understanding, political understanding, may or may not be reflected in trade and economic relations. Recently, defense cooperation has another dimension has been added. Georgia, things are improving, but Azerbaijan, we have much more to do. Now, coming to what is our broad assessment of the region known as the South Caucasus. I think I'm not exaggerating when I say that the South Caucasus is one of the least integrated regions in the world. And this is despite the geographical contiguity between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. You have a region where, despite so close geographical closeness, it remains least integrated. And to make it worse, there are regional conflicts which are still unresolved. I mean, I'm referring also obviously to Georgia, Abkhazia, Southeast Asia, and the other conflicts. They continue to pose a sense of threat to the stability of the region. We have taken note of the positive developments, which is peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There are also signals that Armenia and Turkey plan to normalize their relations. As we all know, they don't have diplomatic relations, borders are closed, so on and so forth. And if you look at the other aspects, I think in my assessment, even though post 2020 conflict, Armenia Azerbaijan 44 days war, and Azerbaijan's abrupt military action in Nagorno-Karabakh, this has kind of changed the scenario to the extent that traditional partnerships are under strain at this point of time. Nevertheless, we think that the strategic space in South Caucasus is still fairly crowded. There may be marginally diminished interest at this point of time, as far as European Union or Americans are concerned, but I think they still, for their vested interest, remain in competition with each other. Or they are they continue to look forward to having their footholds in the region, and they are Americans, they are Europeans, they are, of course, Russians, and to add to that, there are Turkey, Iran, and China, of course. So in this is the broad scenario. How it pans out in future remains to be seen. And also we have taken note of the sort of Turkey, Azerbaijan, Pakistan alliance, which we think is a source of some concern for the Indian interest, direct or indirect. Having said all this, I think the region is still of important, very important region, which offers a lot of opportunities from India's point of view. And this takes me to what is the broad policy framework of India, because having shared with you the broad assessment of how we look at this region. So you must be wanting to know what is India's policy framework. Do we have any, well-defined policy for the region? So let me put it this way. India does not have a pan-South Caucasus policy. We do have policies like well-defined and well-articulated policies like India's neighborhood first policy, India's act east policy, in central connect policy, look west policy, but we don't have any pan-South Caucasus policy. And this is because, different countries have had different approaches towards India. And therefore, we have decided to deal with each country on the basis of merit. This is the first point I wanted to make. And as far as the regional disputes are concerned, India's consistent policy for conflicts and disputes anywhere in the world is that first and foremost we should try that the differences don't become disputes. And if they do become disputes, we should try to resolve them through peaceful means, through negotiations, through diplomacy. Unfortunately, the conflict, the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, despite three major players, OSCE, Minsk Group, and so many other global players involved, they were not able to really, they sometimes even failed to manage that conflict and forget about resolving it. And finally, Azerbaijan's use of force to, realize or achieve its political goals, I think it has set a very wrong example for the rest of the world. Of course, it talks a lot about the UN's failure also in its primary objective of peace and security in the world. And of course, various other geopolitical factors have come into play. So that's a bad precedent, and but we, continue to maintain that it would have been, should have been resolved in a different manner. But we now look forward to the peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan being concluded finally, Armenia and Turkish relations being normalized. And so that, whatever the opportunities and possibilities this region offers to the rest of the world, the best use of those opportunities could be made. Now, this brings me to the final question as to what are India's strategic interests in the region. So let me start by saying that obviously our strategic, interests in the region are not at par with those of the global players, not even some of the regional players. But yes, definitely we are interested in the region, and first and foremost interest in the region is connectivity, because we in India do realize the importance of the region being on the crossroads of Asia and Europe. And India is very keen to promote its, international north-south transport corridor, INS, of which Armenia is also a member, and Iran is also a member. And in this context, Chabahar port of Iran is of great importance to us. And we think, because this Chabahar port, which we are developing and for next 10 years we are going to operate, has given us an opportunity to connect with Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and beyond by bypassing Pakistan, because Pakistan has not been allowing us transit facilities through the land route, and so we are not able to reach out to Afghanistan, Iran, and other countries, our Central Asian countries, through the land route. So that's very important for us. Armenia is a part of this network, and at Armenia's interest and request, Chabahar port has also been included into the international north-south corridor. Then through Iran and Armenia also, we look forward to alternate routes. Those alternate routes have become very essential in the current geopolitical scenario, when the security scenario, when anything can happen in any part of the world and all the supply chains go haywire. So as many alternate routes are possible, they are of importance to all of us. And then there is a Persian Gulf and Black Sea route also. It's quite is also of interest to us. It's futuristic at this point of time. All the countries in this, whether it's Iran, Armenia, Georgia, Belarus, Greece, they are all strategic countries. So connectivity is one important interest that India has in this region. The second important interest of India is the energy. We are energy deficient, and we would always like to have our energy resources supplies diversified. Azerbaijan is an important factor in this context. Despite the low level of political understanding and some bilateral irritants, the private sector has been able to make some investments in the energy sector of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijani crude oil exports are a very big component of the India-Azerbaijan trade. So energy is another. There are some critical raw materials and minerals. The possibility of acquiring from this region has been indicated to us, and so we remain interested in those raw materials which are essential for the development of our own economy. Third is the defense part, the defense cooperation. In India, in the recent years, ever since we launched the Make in India program, India's defense production, indigenous defense production has, been growing at a very fast pace, and we are already exporting to many countries, and we are always looking for markets. And Armenia has already started, we already have some defense deals with Armenia, including training programs, and we are selling some hardware. And I'm told, I have no confirmation, but I'm told that even Azerbaijan has shown some interest in acquiring some defense equipment from us. This interest they have communicated to, through the Middle East countries, but I have no confirmation on that. We have absolutely no intention to promote any arms race in the region. But like any other country, since we have production, we also depend heavily on defense imports. So we are also equally interested in our defense exports. So it's a benign way of looking at different markets. So third is, of course, the trade and investment, which I mentioned that we have left it to the market forces, but the government has been trying to create enabling circumstances, enabling legal instruments such as Avoidance of Double Taxation Acts, etc., etc. We are also hopeful that there might be a free trade agreement with Georgia in future. Then the European Economic Commission also, we are trying to talk about. Armenia is also a member of that. So we are looking at trade and investments coming from those routes. Then, of course, the people-to-people contact, and it's a very positive development that we already have air links, direct air links between New Delhi and Tbilisi and Baku. And I'm told that plans are afoot to introduce a direct flight between between New Delhi and Yerevan also. So this would obviously help in promoting trade and tourism to the extent possible. Then we have our own development assistance programs, and allow me to say that these are non-prescriptive, benign programs. We do not impose any conditions. The choice is left to the receiving country to identify the project where we can help them out. There are capacity building programs. So we are looking at this region also. Already there are many Armenians, Georgians who are undergoing various training programs in India. So this is a program we want to develop. So in all, I would say that in my concluding remarks that the the current scenario is such that the region is very much on India's radar, the foreign policy radar. We are, you know, not, we have de-hyphenated political understanding and trade and investment of an economic dimensions. In spite of, low levels of political understanding, we still have, kept, we are still hopeful to have trade and investments going on. But we do hope that there is political stability which prevails in the region, and so that we are able to, make the best use of the opportunities available there. I may also mention one point I forgot to mention was about the India, Armenia, and Iran trilateral. We have had two meetings, and there also connectivity, trade, other factors are being looked into. And I wanted to clarify here that I don't think India, Iran, and Armenia trilateral has anything to counter Turkey, Azerbaijan, Pakistan alliance. We are capable of dealing the situation independently without trying to mix up the issues. So with these few words, I would like to say my thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I hope what I said made some sense, and I was able to give a pen picture of how India looks at the South Caucasus region, and what are our priorities in the region. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Malhotra, for finding the time to join us in the current circumstances. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome. And now we are going to move further east to China. The previous talks have mentioned the growing role of China in this region, but we haven't reached the bottom of that topic, which is multifaceted. We are very happy to have among us Professor Zheng Hyun Tian. He is the Assistant Director of the Belt and Road Initiative Center at Renmin University of China, in addition to being a full professor there. So the floor is yours, Professor Hyun Tian.
Thank you, Professor Astorian. And thank you for your kind introduction. And dear colleagues and guests, what is this? I'm from Beijing Renmin University of China. It is my great honor and privilege to share my research with global academics. And I'm always touched by your hospitality. That is why, even if this is my fourth time being here, I always feel new and sweet. And my topic today is condition, issues, and features on South Caucasian studies of Chinese academia. And compared with other regional and national research fields, China's academics on the South Caucasus, although still young, has been constantly enriched, developed, and improved along with the changes of the times. Its research institutions, teams, achievements, and paradigms are unique and distinct. A comprehensive and in-depth review of analysis of the history, current situation, and the characteristics, difficulties, and prospects of China's research on the South Caucasus is of great theoretical and practical significance. Here is my outline of my speech. We will talk about it from evolutionary process, current situation, features and challenges, to the prospects. First, the evolutionary process. Before the disintegration of Soviet Union, China's research on the South Caucasus was a branch of Soviet studies. After the Soviet Union's collapse, the three countries in the South Caucasus became relatively independent research subjects. Therefore, Domestic research in this field is often closely related to the situation and hot events in this region. Chinese scholars began to study the South Caucasus in the late 1970s and early 1980s. At that time, it gathered a number of experts in regional history, culture, and ethnic languages. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the Institute of Soviet Union and Eastern Europe of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, which I will call CASS for short, was renamed the Institute of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Besides Beijing, Shanghai, Xinjiang, and Lanzhou also established physical or non-physical research institutions, which began to take shape. The Central Asia and Caucasus Research Office of the Institute of Russian, Eastern European, and Central Asian Studies of the CAS gradually became the National Research Center. Institutions such as the Institute of Modern International Relations and the Institute of International Studies in Beijing, the Institute of Central Asia of Xinjiang Academy of Social Sciences, the Institute of Central Asia of Lanzhou University, the Institute of Central Asian Culture of Xinjiang University, the Institute of World Socialism and the Institute of Soviet Union and Eastern Europe of the School of International Studies of Renmin University of China, and the Institute of Europe and Asia of Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences all had researchers paying attention to this field. And let's see the main development. There are three phases. First, in the 1990s, the research focus on the South Caucasus was relatively limited. Most of these experts were scholars specializing in a certain field of the Soviet Union. They interpreted the emergence of the new countries in the region and the political, economic, and diplomatic changes they presented from different entry points and professional perspectives. They paid attention to the development of each country's situation and conducted some comprehensive studies. The literature they used was mainly in Russian, including Russian language newspapers and periodicals of various countries and the works of Russian scholars. And second, in the first decade of the 21st century, research on the South Caucasus became more diverse. In the relevant works of scholars during this period, both the commonalities and the distinct characteristics of each country were valued, and the overall research level steadily improved. In addition to diplomatic and the security issues, research results on social policies, economic policies, and population policies gradually increased. And third, since 2011, Chinese scholars' thinking on the South Caucasus has become more comprehensive, but the level of attention has shown certain fluctuations. On the one hand, after 2010, the first batch of senior experts retired one after another, and the young research forces failed to take over in time, leading to a shrinking research team and a situation where research results were not continuous. On the other hand, after the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, was proposed in 2013, it greatly promoted research on the South Caucasus. This chart stems from the statistics of the most authoritative academic database in China, which we called CNKI for short. It can be observed that the red curve, this red curve, represents the quantity of published papers on the South Caucasus research in China in various years. Generally, after 1991, the quantity started to increase. In the recent 30 years, in some particular time, due to regional hot incidents, such as the war between Russia and Georgia in 2008, the number of achievements witnessed a considerable growth. This suggests that the Chinese academics mainly advanced the research on the South Caucasus based on occasional security events. And in recent years, domestic universities have expanded their enrollment both at home and abroad and strengthened their research capabilities. Institutions such as Lanzhou University, Shanghai International Studies University, Xinjiang University, Xinjiang Normal University, Shanxi Normal University, Jilin University, Nanjing University, Zhejiang University, and Harbin Institute of Technology have become the main institutions awarding degrees to students from the former Soviet republics in China. The number of dissertations on the South Caucasus has increased significantly. In doctoral and master's theses, topics such as security, ethnic relations, energy, culture, and economy in the South Caucasus with China as the research object are the most common. And when we talk about the core issues, there are two aspects. First, the economic, political, and social development status of the South Caucasus. Economically, in 2012, researchers from CAS analyzed the changes in the economic freedom level, democratic politics and state management capabilities of the South Caucasus countries and their causes, and believed that the economic and social development of the South Caucasus countries was generally stable and upward, mainly due to the improvement of the economic freedom, domestic democratic politics, and state management capabilities to varying degrees. Second, the games among major powers in the South Caucasus. Researchers from Armed Police Command Academy in China said that from the perspective of Russia, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the three South Caucasus countries formed three different security relationships with Russia: hostile relationship, ally relationship, and a balanced relationship. That means pointed to Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Third, the South Caucasus from the perspective of jointly building the BRI. This has been a hot and key issue in the research on this region in recent years. Scholars from Qufu Normal University in Shandong province believes that China and the three South Caucasus countries should seize opportunities, face challenges, and avoid risks, continuously improve the level of connectivity, build a South Caucasus corridor to Europe, and jointly promote the steady and far-reaching development of the BRI. And from the perspective of representative scholars and achievements in China, there have been the following cases in recent years. Translation of cutting-edge research from the foreign think tanks. For instance, researchers from the CAS compiled a brief report titled China's Ambitions in Eastern Europe and the South Caucasus by Professor Roland, which was published on the website of the French Institute of International Relations in December 2018. An academic paper on the geopolitical game in the South Caucasus. Scholars from Lanzhou University pointed out that from Russia's strategic goals in South Caucasus and the foreign policies it has implemented, turning the South Caucasus into an area where Russia's geopolitical influence prevails is not the ultimate goal. The fundamental purpose lies in achieving Russia's political, economic, and strategic interests in the region and maximizing the security of its interests there. Academic paper on the overall situation assessment of the South Caucasus. Scholars from Jiangsu Party Institute of CPC pointed out that the EU, Russia, Turkey, and Iran maintain a power balance in the region. The power weakness of sovereign actors and interstate relationship culture formed by the continental nature have led to an unstructured security situation in the South Caucasus. And the four books by myself, from the left to the right, published in Chinese language, namely South Caucasus in the Changing World Order, Geopolitical Security of Georgia Under the Game of the Great Powers, the Area Study of BRI, Analysis on Armenian Geopolitics, and the Area Study of BRI, Analysis on Azerbaijan Geopolitics, based on the information database of countries along the BRI. These books focus on the history and culture, currently economic and social development, major power games, geopolitical risks, and the positioning and prospects of jointly building the BRI in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And what about the features and challenges of the Chinese academia? First aspect is features. This field has sorry. Yeah, first the depth. Let's see. This field has a very distinct and geopolitical coloration. Domestic scholars have defined the South Caucasus from both a narrow and a broad perspective. Meanwhile, as the geopolitical situation changes, domestic scholars have been focusing on the important factors that cause such changes, particularly the alterations in relations between countries. Secondly, the domestic academia is aware of the gap between the field and the international forefront. In terms of the innovative middle-level concepts in the current research on South Caucasus, the main concept proposers are still Western researchers. Additionally, there are also practical concepts or political discourses proposed by the policy circles of the South Caucasus countries or even Russia. And there are three challenges. First, the problems of an aging research team, uneven regional distribution, and insufficient disciplinary expertise have become increasingly prominent. Over the past decade, with the retirement of the older generation of researchers and the promotion or career change of some researchers, the number of researchers in South Caucasus studies has significantly decreased. Moreover, the age structure is unreasonable, resembling an inverted pyramid. The well-known experts in China who are actively engaged in South Caucasus studies are most scholars in their 50s and 60s, with a few in their 40s and 50s, and even fewer under 40. Second, the openness and cooperation of research platforms are limiting, and there is no dedicated publication outlet for research outcome. Apart from periodicals such as Russia, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe Studies, Russian Studies, and the Journal of Xinjiang Normal University that regularly publish some research outcomes on the South Caucasus, most articles are scattered in various comprehensive international relations periodicals or university journals, making it difficult to achieve a scale effect. Third, the research paradigm is relatively single, and the integration of theory and practice needs to be strengthened. On the one hand, the existing research mainly focuses on tracking the current situation, and the research outcomes with problem orientation and high theoretical depth are not very common. On the other hand, currently, many Chinese scholars obtain materials from Russian and American newspapers and websites, and some false news reports can also mislead academic research. So come to the prospects. There are some opportunities. First, the depth of regional comprehensive research has continued to increase. Scholars systematically analyzed the de-Russification issue of the three South Caucasus countries, arguing that the three South Caucasian countries have achieved certain results in eliminating Russian influence. However, excessive de-Russification measures have also brought certain negative impacts on the education and culture, economic development, inter-ethnic relations, and the relations with Russia in these three countries. Second, the quality of country-specific research has been continuously improving. In my research, the South Caucasus have begun to focus on issues such as economic and trade cooperation, the digital Silk Road, regional security guarantees, and multilateral diplomacy under the BRI. This research discourse shows characteristics such as an attempt to overcome the influence of Western discourse, attention to the driving effect of BRI, and a cautiously optimistic attitude towards the prospects of China's relations with the Euro-Asian region. And third, quantitative analysis methods provide new dynamics. Scholars from Shanxi Normal University conducted a quantitative study on the spatial-temporal evolution of the geopolitical relationship between China and the three South Caucasus countries based on traditional power theories in international relations and combined with mathematical modeling methods. They found that while the overall relationship between the two sides has improved. Each country has its own evolution characteristics, confirming the geopolitical reality that China's influence in the three South Caucasus countries has been increasingly prominent under policy guidance. And what about the future tendency? There are three aspects. Firstly, from the perspective of the team building and talent cultivation, an increasing number of young people are beginning to pay attention to the South Caucasian issues. The exchanges between students from China and other countries are becoming more and more frequent. After the proposal of BRI, a group of young people studying international politics and international relations have started to focus on the South Caucasus. Secondly, interdisciplinary research and problem-oriented research will become more prominent. Influenced by major international events, many scholars have shifted their focus from fields such as international politics, international economics, sociology, ethnology, and anthropology to the South Caucasian issues. They have also introduced research methods from other disciplines into this field. And thirdly, academic communications between China and the academia of the South Caucasus will become more abundant. In recent years, researchers from institutions such as Renmin University of China, Fudan University, Tongji University, and the Jiangsu Party Institute of CPC have carried out fruitful academic cooperation with academia in Eurasian region. With the help of academic platform established by Armenian think tank, 2 English language books have been published overseas. The first one is China and Eurasia, Rethinking Cooperation and Contradictions in the Era of Changing World Order. The other one is China and Eurasian Powers in a Multipolar World 2.0. So to sum up, as the construction of the Silk Road economic belt enters a new development stage, it is necessary for the domestic academia to conduct a more in-depth and detailed review of the South Caucasus, which is located at a geopolitical node, to learn from the past and understand the future. When researchers examine the internal affairs and foreign policies of the region and analyze the similarities and differences as well as interactions among the countries within the region and with the major powers outside the region, the South Caucasian studies will also make new contributions to the development of Eurasian region. And that is my speech for today. I sincerely hope that this research field can be more blossom and prosperous, just like this wonderful South Caucasian spring season. And thank you very much for listening, and appreciate the organizers and the volunteers of this great conference.
Good. Welcome back. We are in the second session. Our next speaker is Alexander Iskenderyan, Director of Caucasus Institute. Alex.
Thank you, Mustafa. Is it okay? Can you listen to me? No? So, hello?
Can I try this one?
No, I think it works, no?
Is the, no? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm close. Okay. When the conference organizers asked me if I can make a presentation about Russia, my first urge was to say no. I have never done research on Russia or Russian domestic politics, except for the Northern Caucasus, but it's quite another story, a very special case, without direct relevance to the topic I was asked to cover today. And yet I didn't say no. One thing that made me agree is the surprising fact that in Armenia political scientists who study Russian politics are, to put it politely, rather few. My second reason was for agreeing to speak here today is that in Armenia, and not only in Armenia, discourses about Russia are becoming more and more normative. more value-based. There is less and less scholarly analysis, or indeed any kind of analysis, I would say, or any kind of effort to understand why certain things are taking place, rather than simply say that they are evil and wrong and should not be taking place. This normative attitude has engulfed all the discourses about Russia, including ones that are supposed or expected to be analytical. This means that somehow when the object of study is Russia, scholarly analysis is no longer about knowledge or insight, but about proclaiming one's adherence to ethical standards. While it's crucial for a scholar to adhere to ethical standards, I still believe replacing analytical insight with diatribes is a bad idea because, among other things, the lack of in-depth understanding makes it harder to achieve ethical goals as well. My academic advisor, Dr. Fuhrman, sadly now deceased, did some of the most original and insightful research on the post-Soviet space, even done by a political scientist. In a paper that he wrote sometime in the 90s, Dr. Fuhrman said that Russia had two kinds of foreign policy. Foreign policy in a tailcoat and foreign policy in a dressing gown. He used this metaphor to illustrate the difference between Russia's policies towards, on the one hand, the Western countries, the West, and other countries which had not been part of USSR. And on the other hand, then, newly independent post-Soviet states. Back then, in Russia, they were known as the far abroad, the near abroad, Ближнее зарубежье in Russian. Come to think of it, the phrases far abroad and near abroad are ironic. For example, Norway shares a border with Russia, but it is still the far abroad. Contrastingly, two large countries lie between Russia and Tajikistan, but Tajikistan is near abroad. So that Dr. Fuhrman said was that back then Russia wore a tailcoat when dealing with its far abroad and a dressing gown to deal with its near abroad. Unlike its relations with the rest of the world, Russia's relations with the countries of the former USSR were chiefly based on informality. Instead of being designed by its Ministry for Foreign Affairs and implemented by its diplomatic service, Russia's foreign policy toward post-Soviet countries was chiefly carried out on the level of personal contacts among senior officials. Most of the decision-making was done in a dressing gown, in a private setting. This did not necessarily imply being on friendly terms or even on decent terms. It merely implied being part of a closed, informal community. It also meant that in Russia's eyes, the formerly independent post-Soviet countries were not in fact entirely independent from Russia. Now, 3 decades later, it's already time to come up with a new metaphor. Perhaps I can use this occasion to take up the baton from my teacher and say that Russia's foreign policy in the post-Soviet space has now become a foreign policy in military uniform. So, what has changed and why? What to expect? To answer these questions, we mustn't focus on the present, but on the trends. If we follow the trends, we may be able to see the logic of this. Changes in Russian policy in the former post-Soviet space have been quite dynamic in the last 2 decades, I would say. This is not a new process. I believe that it began in 2008, not so much with the Russian-Georgian War itself, as with Russia's subsequent recognition of Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states. In 2008, we looked back and realized that while Russia never took the independence of post-Soviet countries seriously, it had for almost 2 decades respected the inviolability of their borders. While it did take sides in ethno-political conflicts, it never challenged the legality of the configuration of borders created after the disintegration of USSR. In 2008, something moved. As a result of its war against Georgia, Russia gained a part but lost the whole. Its de facto annexation of Abkhazia and South Ossetia ruins its relationships with Georgia. Georgia did all it could to stop being a post-Soviet country, to distance itself from Russia, and as far as possible to associate itself with the West and with Europe. I do not believe this goal was achievable, but Georgia tried very hard. Again, there is a metaphor to illustrate this endeavor uttered by Kacha Bendukidze, Georgia's Minister of Economy of Georgia. Imagine that there is a sea instead of Russia, he said. The next stage of this trend began with Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. This time, Russia went further. Rather than recognize the independence of Crimea, like it did in case of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, Russia opened annexed it. The consequence was, as in the case of Georgia, gaining a part and losing the whole. A pro-Russian Ukraine became an impossible. This would have been true even if Russia had not unleashed a war against Ukraine just 8 years later, in 22. The start of the Ukraine war in 2022 marked the third stage of the same trend, which I would call the liquidation of post-Soviet space. It still exists to various extents in the linguistic, cultural, economic sense, but geopolitically, the post-Soviet space is becoming more of a historical fact than political reality. At most, it can be called post-Soviet space. The only things still holding it together are the command of Russian by older generations, Soviet colonial architecture, and perhaps the Russian salad Olivier. Otherwise, this space is as heterogeneous as it can be. Even if one looks really hard, I doubt one can find two countries as different as Turkmenistan and Estonia, for example. In the whole world, not just in post-Soviet space. Even if you forget about Turkmenistan for a moment and look closer to home, we can see that Azerbaijan is more similar to Egypt than to Armenia. And Moldova has more common with Greece than with Belarus. My point is that the obvious divergence is the result of weakening of Russia. Unlike many observers and analysts, I believe Russia has been getting weaker, not stronger. A strong, confident Russia, possessing significant soft power, economic capacity, political and cultural appeal, would not need to behave like it does, especially given that the result of Russia's policies in the last 2 decades has been in shrinking zone of influence in the former USSR and beyond. That does not mean that a weak Russia is less dangerous than a strong one, perhaps the opposite. This also does not mean that Russia is losing ability to exert pressure on neighboring countries. But it does mean that the overall trend in the former USSR is toward political diversification. Whether or not Russia scores a military victory against Ukraine, whatever that means, Russia will be perceived as an enemy for generations in what remains of Ukraine. Sanctions against Russia are unlikely to be lifted completely. Russia's image in Europe will not be easy to mend. Russia simply does not have the tools like, for example, BBC or Deutsche Welle to do this. These discourses that previously existed in Poland, in the Baltic states, and partly in the UK are now pan-European. We are now watching Russia lose its presence in Syria, and this will affect its influence in Africa. Russia clearly lacks resources to exert influence in all these directions at once. And ironic though it may sound, I believe the unleashing of its war against Ukraine has been the consequence of Russia's weakness, not its cause. In the South Caucasus, Russia started losing its footing before the war in Ukraine, as a result of Turkey's almost direct participation in the Second Karabakh War of 2020. Russia lost its regional monopoly in the realm of security. Although it was not the Turkish but the Azerbaijani army that fought that war, Turkey has strong involvement in planning, technical assistance, training, and apparently a significant part of the command and at medium level. In any case, without Turkey's involvement, the outcome of the war would have been different. Incidentally, this was the first time since the collapse of USSR that a non-post-Soviet country became engaged as a military force in an armed conflict in the former USSR. This never happened in any conflict in former USSR, neither in Moldova, nor in Tajikistan, nor in Georgia, nor in North Caucasus. Combatants from outside the post-Soviet space, outside former Soviet Union, participated in the Chechen conflict, but these were Islamic radicals, usually from Arab countries, driven by Islamic ideologies involved in their personal capacities. They were not state actors. Turkey is a country. And not just, Turkey is a NATO member country at that. It was able to wedge itself into a region that Russia had considered its exclusive sphere of influence. In the end, Russia's ally lost, Turkey's ally won. And even though Russia obtained a new tool of influence in the region when its peacekeepers were stationed there under the November 9-10, 2020 agreement, this project only survived a few years, not much for a country with Eurasian ambitions. One can argue if Russia's blatant failure to fulfill commitment signed by Putin in 2020 or in 2023 had been the result of incompetence, malicious intent, a change of priorities, or lack of resources. The way I see it doesn't really matter. What matters is that Russia has lost its footing there. Azerbaijan no longer needs Russia military support, because it won the war. Armenia because it lost. Moreover, the South Caucasus is no longer just part of the post-Soviet space or post-Soviet space. We now also belong to the Middle East or Greater Middle East. Though this new lens, we can see that the 2020 war in Nagorno-Karabakh was similar to the Idlib operation in Syria, and that in our region, like in Syria. Russians now has to coordinate its actions with Turkey. The last thing I would like to mention here is a question often asked by journalists and even previous speaker told about us. Will Russia make a comeback to the South Caucasus region if and when the war in Ukraine ends? My answer is perhaps, but it won't be the same region. Russia's hegemony in the South Caucasus had relied on two things. One was the region's isolation from major external influences, its post-Sovietness. The second was the existence of Nagorno-Karabakh, not just a territory populated by ethnically Armenians, but an entity, an unrecognized one, but still an entity, the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, Artsakh. As long as it existed, Russia remained a key player, using Azerbaijan to influence Armenia and Armenia to influence Azerbaijan. Even if we assume in 2020 Russia made a rational decision to sacrifice Armenia in favor of the more significant or, I don't know, more profitable Azerbaijan, that was not good thinking. With the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic out of the picture, Russia lost its leverage, and with it, both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Of course, this is just about strategic presence. It's not about everything else. It is realm of economy, communication, perhaps culture, language for a while. Russia will remain in the region. We cannot move Upper Lars from Russia to Luxembourg. But in the strategic sense, the monopoly is gone. This doesn't mean that the new region will be better or worse, just different. There will be no sea instead of Russia, but Heraclitus River metaphor still holds. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Also, keeping the 20 minutes. Great, thanks very much. Now we are go deeper into Russia, yet more. Olesya Vartanyan, and she's going to search for peacekeeper, power broker, or declining hegemon, Russia.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think you can hear me. So although I will speak about Russia, it will not be really about Russia. It's just, I think it's my what I'm going to speak about, it's more a continuation of the conversation that started during the first panel. It's about like whether what's happening with the international order, whether we are seeing a new order and things like that. And I will, in a way, make an attempt to discuss, well, in some case also the ongoing events here related to Russia, but they are not only about this country. So I will speak about the Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh, and will give you some ideas why I think there were the problems and how the mission failed, And I also then switched to the discussion of the Russian presence and the role in two breakaway regions in Georgia, which are Abkhazia and South Ossetia, where we see a different situation, where we see a relative stability in place, and in fact, even more cooperation going on. So I will start with the Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh. I think it's a really fascinating topic for any scholar to study, and you might remember that the mission started its functioning as a result of the ceasefire statement after the brutal war that took lives of at least 7,000 people. The Russian peacekeepers that went there, they started helping on all different fronts, and then their presence there in a way was taken as an assurance for the local population. And I remember that time I was here, in fact, in Yerevan, how people started boarding the buses and going back to Nagorno-Karabakh. So despite all the problems, like with the mission or the question that I will be raising now, the people, for them, it was a possibility to go back and then to start living from scratch. Well, the ceasefire statement that was revealed at the end of the war provided some guidance, some detail about the peacekeeping mission. And then what's really interesting is that we actually got nothing more than that. So with several sentences that are in this ceasefire statement is the only text that gave life to the peacekeeping mission and described its mandate and its mission. And, for some people, again, it was not a problem. But for those who study, especially the peacekeeping mission and how it works in the international order, they right away started asking questions. Does it mean that that document, or there will be some provision discussed in the international organizations? Should we take it to the UN Security Council? Should we have the OSCE that will provide some sort of an umbrella to the mission? I should say that I was one of these people as well, asking whether there can be a possibility to have something like even a small civilian mission in addition to the Russian peacekeepers who will have some sort of a role. And in that sense, of course, there are some other examples. And for example, South Ossetia is the one that was functioning before the 2008 war, where you had the mixed peacekeeping forces, and on top of them, there were the OSCE monitors that were doing the work. Of course, there are some more examples like this, including in the post-Soviet space. But the thing is that there was absolutely no progress and no discussion, real discussion taking place about the Russian peacekeepers and whether what's their international really role and the presence and the mandate. At the end of 2020, there was an OSCE summit, as it usually happens, and then there was a broad acknowledgement of the results of the war, with no precise, again, text about the Russian peacekeepers, that, in my view, could have been, again, a way to introduce some additional norms and checks on the Russian peacekeeping mission in Nagorno-Karabakh. There was an attempt by Moscow to negotiate the mandate with magic word, for any peacekeeping mission in the world, to negotiate the mandate bilaterally with Yerevan and Baku. But that ended quite soon. Yeah, so again, we basically got, as a result of the 2020 war, we got and then with statement, we got the mission that was there with just several sentences in the ceasefire statement. I assume many of you know, but the deployment of the Russian peacekeeping mission basically very soon led to the isolation of the region for many foreign visitors. So only nationals with the Armenian passport and the Russian passports were able to visit the region. But what was happening is that in many cases we were learning about the mission itself through the materials that it was distributing on daily basis and also in social media. They would produce thousands of them, and then some crazy people like me, they would look into them and would try to find the logic. They were publishing daily reports, they were publishing also social media stuff, and also the maps where they were projecting all different developments that they were seeing on the ground. And when a person like me was looking at all of this, we were trying to systematize, and to see whether there could be some trends identified using again the data that the Russian peacekeeping mission was projecting to the world, also to tell a story of success. Yeah, I mean, because that's basically what people like me were hearing also from the Russian officials at that time, that they want to show that they are doing fine. But, the longer it went, the more it started just kind of, becoming public, even through the data of the Russian peacekeepers themselves, that the situation on the ground was not really very stable. And then that started especially becoming more visible since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Here you can see, and then with this again kind of using the data of the Russian peacekeepers, how many more incidents started taking place inside Nagorno-Karabakh after the invasion. And then with the data from the date of deployment until the invasion, and since the invasion till the last day of the Russian peacekeepers' presence in Nagorno-Karabakh. The Russian peacekeepers, they were having quite a number of roles. It was not just them standing and guarding the situation or registering what's happening. They were also escorting farmers to some of the places near the military positions. They were also saying that they were doing the demining on the ground. They were also escorting pilgrims from Armenia and from inside Nagorno-Karabakh to some monasteries and important places that were either inside Azerbaijani-controlled area or very close to it. And then when again you start looking into how the role and then the functions of the Russian peacekeepers started changing with the invasion of Ukraine, you can see that in fact the role of the Russian peacekeepers started disappearing. The peacekeepers, they would do their daily patrols in different parts of Nagorno-Karabakh, and if you actually try to analyze different periods, you see that they were patrolling all the right places, because that very places were the ones to escalate at some point later on. But their presence and then their patrols were not changing anything anymore. Even more, you can see how they stopped doing escorts of the people either to the farming lands or to the religious sites. And what's really very interesting is that at some point they were not even doing the mining. And I would say that one reason why, again, we got the Russian peacekeepers that just became useless, it's again the fact that they did not have a mandate. And then the mandate that could have given them a chance to argue about the role and given them also a possibility to somehow work with the rest of the world in terms of sustaining their function. Of course, the collapse, I mean, the most visible collapse for everyone, it was with the blockade, when the Azerbaijani representatives, they blocked the main road that was connecting Stepanakert to Armenia, and then the Russian peacekeepers were standing there without any ability to do anything. And then I think it became very visible, kind of, and spectacular to all of us that it's really not working, that they are functioning there. It doesn't really have an impact. And of course, right away, you got political speculations about Russia doing this on that. And certainly, we could have been could have its role and the place. But I would say that we would not really have this situation, or we could at least could have a different situation or a possibility for the intervention and changing it if, again, the Russian peacekeepers were the one to have a mandate and an international mechanism in place. As a result of it, we all know what happened. Azerbaijan launched a military operation. Within one day, they took control of certain areas that made the de facto authorities surrender. People left the region. Russian peacekeepers, a number of them, including the deputy head of the mission, was killed. And then when Azerbaijan apologized, Moscow accepted it. And I should remind you that in 2008, the alleged killing of the Russian peacekeepers became a pretext for the invasion of Georgia. So it kind of also shows you to what extent Russia had to show its flexibility with what was happening in Nagorno-Karabakh. Well, you know, when you look at the situation in Georgia, it's very different. In Georgia, after the 2008 war, there was also a ceasefire statement that was brokered with the participation of the French president, who was at that time heading the European Union. And then as a result of this ceasefire statement, we got an international format, the Geneva International Discussions. Russia recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia, while the rest of the world, they mainly were on the other side. They were speaking about the territorial integrity of Georgia. And still, despite with this agreement, we got a format and arrangements that included both Russia, the European Union, the United States, the OSCE, and the UN. They formed with Geneva International Discussions, where the discussions are still going on. As a result of also with international intervention, we got the EU monitoring mission that is observing the situation on the Georgian side. So they don't have really access to Abkhazia and South Ossetia, but they facilitate the work of the hotline that helps the sides to communicate between each other, and also they facilitate regular meetings so that they have a discussion on some incidents and also some of the problems that are regularly taking place just because it's life. What's really very interesting is that despite all other problems that were taking place again at the beginning of the invasion, the Western countries, the European Union and the United States, along with the OSCE and the UN representatives, they decided to keep the Geneva International Discussion. It was one of very few, I think there were just two, for many months, where you had the Western officials and then the Russian representatives meeting each other. You know, in Georgia, there is with speculation that the current Georgian government is using. They're saying that the West was pushing Georgia to open the second front against Russia. But I mean, when you look at this, actually, the decision to sustain the format for the engagement, for the relative stability, for keeping the relative stability in Georgia, it proves opposite. In fact, the West was committing to to more cooperation just to keep calm, so that the situation in Georgia remains calm. Well, what was happening, what's still in fact happening since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that on both fronts, in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, we have the situation as stable as never before. One official told me that it's a honeymoon for him, Georgian official, because Russian side is so cooperative, and then they happen to resolve any incident that emerges. Like if a person gets detained, that person, they start working on releasing that person right away. If previously, for example, a former military Georgian, got detained at the conflict line, that meant that that person would have to spend years in the prison somewhere in South Ossetia. It doesn't happen anymore. Even more, if previously there were constantly arguments around so-called borderization, some incidents along the line that separate the conflict regions from the rest of the Georgia, now if it happens, it's very calm and then in a very working manner. One would say that it's just because Russia and Georgia, they are having their rapprochement, you know, and they're so well to each other. And this can be the case. Of course, for Russia, I mean, if, for example, some major incident now takes place in one of these conflict zones, it will have its impact on the Georgian Russian relation at this very moment. I would say that there is also another dimension where you have the Russian forces that at the very beginning of the invasion in Ukraine, almost half of them, they were taken out of Abkhazia, South Ossetia, just because Russia needed fighters and also the military vehicles for another front. So for them, naturally, it would not be kind of, you know, very favorable to have any kind of major incident in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, just because it will distract them from the main front line. On the Georgian side, Georgians are absolutely not interested in having any kind of instability, because they say that they don't have this deep, with strategic depth that you see in Ukraine. So if, for example, Russia suddenly decides to attack, it will take Russia very little to achieve serious results. I mean, and then the Georgian army would not be able to stand and then to resist for more than 3 days. So, I mean, of course, these are very important factors, but I would say that one of the main ones that still helped, even if we, for example, were not to have them, it's definitely the presence and the commitment of international actors in this very format and in this very case of Georgia. So these guys, despite disagreeing with the Russian invasion and then having the problems with Russia on other fronts, they still helped them to prevent the incidents in Georgia. And then even more, they were helping them with the humanitarian work, for example, on missing people, or some of the conversations that were taking place on the water. If we were to have just one Russia there, the potential for having an incident or an escalation could be so much bigger and then more significant. And then to conclude, I would just say that, look, I mean, it's like when you pass your driving test and then you see that your first car, of course you can get killed by just driving, but at the same time there are some precautions that we are taking. And in that sense, despite having this international order that is going one way or another, where we have this very strange situation when some international organizations work and some don't, when we have the West and Russia kind of, you know, having their own problems, seems like when you have someone else present for your problems, it can help, because it introduces a certain kind of, you know, pattern and also some norms, and then also facilitates some sort of communication. Of course, it's not a 100% guarantee, but this is something that can help sometimes. Of course, that also has its different side, and then this is something that people criticize quite a lot, is that many of these mechanisms, unfortunately, they tend to freeze rather than resolve the conflicts. But this is probably a topic for a different conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, this is our last session today. The topic is very simple. Is real peace. I would emphasize the adjective real here. That is, the topic is not signing a piece of paper. It's something a little bit more substantial. Is real peace possible within the short or medium term? That is, I mean, 2 to 5 years, something like that. Every speaker has up to 5 minutes. It can be shorter than that. The idea is not to meditate for a very long time. We'll have to end this session at 6:25 so that the speakers can go to their hotel and then subsequently go to the restaurant to enjoy a little bit themselves. So I have no particular order of priority. Maybe I should start from my right, and then we move straight this way, or we can do it alphabetically. It doesn't matter. Let's start from the right, it's very simple. It's nobody selected these.
Thank you very much. Short answer, no. So far as real peace is concerned. And of course the question is, define real peace. I would say genuine peace. The short answer, huge challenge. But what is possible is a genuine leadership and vision within the region, which starts putting together the building blocks. And it's one hell of a hard job. We had a conversation with one of the colleagues here, again, referring to the European Union. It started with European coal and steel community. Before that, there was a long history of intellectual build-up of Europe, which is capable to cooperate. So I believe in leadership and vision, which is in great demand, and which generates that narrative regionally about the benefits of living together, the benefits of genuine peace. And when I say leadership, yes, it is the political leadership, first of all, it accelerates things. But it's the leadership of the nations, starting from such platforms where thinking community penetrates the minds of the people. It's all about the people. Peace, genuine peace, is about the people. Guiding, shepherding people to that is leadership. So I believe in that, and I believe in the capacity to start putting together the genuine building blocks for what constitutes living together. Genuine peace. Thank you.
Just continue. Okay. I think the operative word here is the real peace, because that said, there is a huge debate in international relations and peace studies, of course, what constitutes peace. If you mean no war, then definitely that's possible. And I think that's more than possible within the next up to 5 years. For simple reason that the possible challengers of the existing status quo are weaker than pro-status quo forces. There have been two areas of conflict in the Caucasus, South Caucasus, one in Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the other one is within Georgia with its minorities. In both cases now there is a situation existing where upper hand is taken by the militarily more powerful actor. So in that sense, I don't see in next 2-3 years or 5 years a new eruption of the warfare. But this is the cold peace. Right? It's possible. But if you want so-called warm peace, that's what the minister was talking about, is you need reconciliation, not fighting with each other. You need reconciliation of groups, nations, and ethnicities. And if that's the question, my response is no. I don't see even the beginning of reconciliation between, say, Azerbaijan and Armenia, but also, not only that, also between Georgia and its former minorities. So I said yes to cold peace, no to warm peace. That's the short answer.
More or less, I'm sure I agree with two previous speakers. The answer is no. 5 years is a lot, really. What's going to be in 5 years? I would not talk about that. But in 2 years, a bit more, definitely no. The logic. My logic on that is very simple. You have asymmetry of motivations from Armenian side and Azerbaijani side. If you look from Armenian side, the logic is very understandable, by the way. We lost the war. We are weaker than Azerbaijanis. Potentially you cannot imagine this situation changed in 2, 3, 5 years. It's impossible. So we have problems with hard security. So we need to replace this hard security with something else. Something else is a signing paper agreement, delimitation, demarcation, open borders, normalization with Turkey, blah blah blah, etc. What is the reason of that view? Risks. We have risks from Azerbaijan. We have risks of escalations, of war, of such kind of things. It's very understandable. Please don't understand me as a primitive Armenian patriot who said that Armenians are just peaceful, nice, and beautiful. No, before 2020 it was vice versa. We changed. So we need peace for minimization of risks from Azerbaijan. As for Azerbaijanis, nobody there think that they have risk from Armenia. Nobody there think that Armenians tomorrow can take back Nagorno-Karabakh or, I don't know, bomb Baku or something like that. Nobody. So they don't need peace. It's not their goal. If that, why they need all this process? Because their real goal is to have as weak Armenia as they can in these years where everybody is busy with Ukraine, Middle East, Iran, etc., etc. You have time and you try to take all results of military victory. So you do that. You push on Armenians in different ways, diplomatically, I don't know, discursively, etc., on the ground, etc., and peace negotiations. And you should change your constitution, you should do this, you should do that. It's one of the types of pushing on Armenia. Just that. From this composition, I cannot imagine real negotiations on peace. Last but not least, even if I can be mistaken, I can imagine political situation outside or inside, doesn't matter the region, when Azerbaijan would be need to sign something. You can it, at least theoretically. I don't think it's very possible. In short period, it's not possible. But theoretically, if tomorrow Azerbaijan would have to sign something, agreement on peace and peace are different things. Even in that case, my answer would be no. Thank you.
I think that in the short term, there are 3 key questions here in the South Caucasus. At least these are the topics that are definitely of my interest. So one of them is whether we are to see the next steps in Armenia-Turkey normalization process, or whatever you can call it. And if it happens, what it can lead to. Because if we are to see, in fact, for example, the crossing of the border, or direct or even transit between Armenia and Turkey, it will be absolutely different reality. And anytime I personally have a conversation, especially with those who are foreign diplomats, they ask me, you know, like, how does it come? How can Armenians really go for it? But I think it's definitely a step very long overdue, and is something that can dramatically change the situation here in the South Caucasus. Some speak about geopolitics. I'm probably more on the human level even. But I mean, for me, this is like topic number 1. The second one topic is what will be happening to the current Armenian government, and especially in light of the next election, the upcoming election, whether we are to see in fact, Russia reasserting itself and, as one of the speakers today said, finding the way to oust the leadership here. I think the very domestic story here in Armenia will be also something that will very much kind of predict the situation and what will be happening in the South Caucasus. And the third topic that is of interest is how deep will go Georgia with its authoritarian turn that is currently still taking place. And in that sense, of course, it's not just the Georgian story. There can be some opposition and civil society people sent to prison. And we definitely see how the Georgian Dream, the ruling party, is entrenching itself. We have Bedzina Ivanishvili as the founder, and then he brought all his funds to Georgia, even his paintings, very expensive ones, and he's kind of building a huge castle around himself. And then in that sense, kind of you ask yourself how far this guy can go in order to protect himself. And in that sense, of course, this makes Georgia very vulnerable and potentially even kind of more keen to make deals with countries, not just Russia, but also countries like Azerbaijan. So these three topics for me are in the short term. But I mean, for the longer perspective, I have this kind of traditional thinking about the conflicts, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Abkhazia, Georgia, South Ossetia, Georgia, Russia. These things very much depend on external factors, in my view. Georgia's story is very much about Ukraine and how the situation will be settled there. If we are to see, for example, the US blessing, for example, annexation and Russia taking or kind of increasing its authority of certain territories, right away there is a question, what will be happening to Abkhazia and South Ossetia? Should we also say that Abkhazia and South Ossetia qualify for certain kind of, revisions of territorial integrity principle? When people speak about Russia granting Abkhazia and South Ossetia, it's absolutely not serious. We got generations now in Abkhazia and South Ossetia who haven't seen ever ethnic Georgian. And in that sense, even if Russia comes and starts imposing certain things on Abkhazia and South Ossetia, I think it will be still a very wasted promise, and then just kind of, it will take just 2-3 years for people to start to saying that, oh, it's not working. Sorry about that. We saw it in the 90s. And I think it's not really something that can develop. And on Armenia, Azerbaijan, I think the previous speakers, they touched on different layers there. I think one real potential for another attack, big attack, and another invasion is very much about something that will be happening somewhere else. Like, let's hope that not, but if we are to see a military operation in neighboring Iran, who knows? If this is a really kind of big thing happening either at the regional scale or internationally, then why not? But in broad terms, especially when you speak to Azerbaijani scholars, you get a sense that the feeling that they have is that they got what they wanted, and even more, the situation, especially along the front line, is as such that Azerbaijan is already controlling Armenia. And then Azerbaijan in a position to dictate certain things to Armenia. And in that sense, using additional force, it should be there only for something. And that something, of course, can come and go and will very much kind of depend on different agendas.
Thank you. I won't repeat some of the points of my distinguished colleagues. I will add a few more. There is an article in Political Science about regime types that are most prone warlike, they like war or prone to war. The type of regime that exists in Azerbaijan right now is the apex of that hierarchy, actually. It's worse than a military dictatorship, juntas, and so on. There is a whole chain going down. So this is the ideal regime for that type of attitude. That's the first point. The second point, we are dealing now in Azerbaijan with a generation, 2 generations of people. The youngest ones, let's say 25, 30, and to 30, have grown in an atmosphere, in a brainwashing system of hatred towards Armenians. In school, elementary school, middle school, high school, public discourse, and so on. They have no experience of living with Armenians. Those who have any experience of cohabitation, living together, are basically approximately 50-year-old now. They were, let's say, 15-year-old or 17-year-old by 1990. A 5-year-old is not going to remember cohabitation with Armenians, okay? So we are going to that older generation which will fade away like all of us one day. So when you have that type of population, of course, that's a bit of a problem. The same problem, by the way, applied and applies in Turkey with generations that have been educated in a particular way about the Armenian genocide. If a leader crops up and suddenly says it has happened, you have a problem because you have been saying just the opposite for 70 years. So we have a similar type of problem. Number 3, I don't expect any real peace. I don't even know whether it's 5 years or more. For the following reason, we have to look at the pattern of negotiations. Any time that the Armenian government, first behind closed doors, agrees to something, and then slowly reveals that it agrees, it is willing to cancel the Minsk group, it is willing to change the constitution, not because there are any pressures. It feels like doing it. Okay, not at all, no pressure. It wants to do it. Excellent. It is willing to withdraw the lawsuits in international courts because they are meaningless in case of peace, you know? So what happens after that? And I can continue. Azerbaijan says, yeah, that's great, but you know, you have to hand over the criminals of the first Karabakh war. It doesn't say I'm pulling out my own lawsuits or anything. You agree to change the constitution. Have you taken a look at the declaration on the re-establishment of statehood of Azerbaijan, which is the foundation of their constitution? Take a look at it. It lays claims to about half of Armenia, at least 1/3 of Georgia, Dagestan, plus Iran. Okay? And it has constitutional power. Take a look at it. Why isn't the Armenian government saying, oh, of course, we are going to change our Declaration of Independence, you know, leave it aside from the constitution, but, you know, you change your little proclamation here that is a bit problematic. Why am I saying this? Because, of course, we know there is a claim to Western Azerbaijan and the return of 300,000, no less, Azerbaijani to their native homeland. Let me add another one, because I have found about 12 of those. But I won't continue. I have 5 minutes. I might have exceeded them already. Another one that is very interesting, Armenia has to disarm, basically. Disarm, you know, maybe a gendarmerie, some people on bicycles, like in Switzerland, you know, they can go take a look at the borders, because security will prevail, so, you know, why do you need an army? I mean, when you have peace. And I can still continue. I can continue, I can assure you. 12 I have found. Now, why am I mentioning all of this? Because in a pattern of negotiation, if one side sees that you are giving up on every single demand, I mean, if I were the president of Azerbaijan, I wouldn't stop personally. I think it's a logical, totally rational behavior in negotiations. Where that ends, I have no idea. But bottom line, I am not very optimistic for the reasons mentioned, plus the reasons mentioned by all of my colleagues, you know. So I think that's it.
Thank you. As you didn't, in your question, whether I'm ready to attend this short, quick panel, about the location. So I was thinking, is it peace in our solar system, in the world, or in the universe, or in Europe, or simply here? I realize that it's here, but for all these locations, my answer would be no. So this, but when it comes to the region proper, 3 points. One, I think a bad peace is a recipe for the next war. An imposed peace is, I mean, we have so many examples in the history. I mean, I think the best one is 1919, the Versailles Treaty. You can also argue with the Trianon Treaty of 1920. So these are all imposed bad pieces. And the results, I mean, we know the results, of course, rearming of Dritte Reich, etc. So, I mean, even if it's imposed upon the nation which is mid-long term, it just won't work. Someone will raise one day and will try to take revenge. As simple as that. The second point is about a genuine peace, a lasting peace. I mean, which is the country in the region who is talking about peace? It's only Armenia. No one else is talking about uttering the word peace. No one is talking about peace. Only Armenia is talking about peace and means it. Because a genuine lasting peace is among democracies. Only democracies can conclude genuine and lasting peace. And unfortunately, we don't have the conditions for that here. And thirdly, regarding the role of Turkey, and which may impress upon Aliyev, have a leverage over Azerbaijan because it's a big country, blah blah, etc. Well, it's half true. I mean, it's actually it's not true at all because I mean it started with the killing of the protocols in 2008, but at the time, you know, the dependence of Ankara, of Baku, was not that relevant as today. Today, I mean, never forget, Turkey is a bankrupt country. Turkey is a bankrupt country. The thing is that no one in the West wants to hear this and is dead afraid of Turkey imploding. This is why, you know, here and there, Turkey is taken care of to make sure that it will continue as it is. So that country needs Qatar, needs Saudi Arabia, needs Europe, needs the United States, needs Russia. This huge bill of 20 billion of gas right before the elections, still not paid, by the way. So Putin has it somewhere, and of course Azerbaijan. I mean, we know in the books that the country has at least $25 billion investment in Turkey, but this is the investment that we know. So they are probably, maybe you can add 1 0 to it, or I mean, at least multiply by 3. Erdogan needs Aliyev. And that therefore, he has no leverage whatsoever over Aliyev. So frankly, it's, I mean, I wish that was the case, but no. And in a foreseeable future, that Turkey will never have any leverage over Azerbaijan. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, the question itself is very interesting because, as many of speakers said, it is critical to understand what we mean under peace. I mean, I could start, you know, talking about the theoretical balance of power in the region, you know, kind of referring to neo-realists or structural realists, and then and then jump over a Kantian kind of democratic peace and look whether, you know, democracies in the region, I mean, generally how democratic they are, and if they are democratic, whether they internally kind of predestined to kind of talk rather than to fight each other. But, you know, apart these two kind of theoretical approaches, I think to me personally, four aspects are of critical importance. First of all, there must be a strong will to have a peace in the region. And that's problematic itself, because as many of you mentioned, there is significant lack of strong will to have a lasting peace in the region. Then the next is, in order to, once you have a will, you have to have a shared interests and the principles upon which you are going to establish a lasting peace. And there again, we have a big problem, because the Georgian vision of peace, our interests, or Armenians or Azerbaijani vision of key principles and interests are completely different. Then this third point is the position of the foreign powers. Generally, again, referring to the balance of power, we would wish to have a foreign power that would be more constructive in the region and not attempting to dominate entirely the region. You know, Russia is just one example. And you know this famous kind of saying that if you paraphrase it in Russian, Russia never leaves. Russia is just regrouping, you know, to return. So these foreign powers generally have to be very constructive, not attempting to turn over the entire construction in the region and to dominate entirely, not only, you know, kind of on the formal level, but also dominate internally the countries, dominate the political elites, the economic structure, etc. In a clear example of that attempts to dominate is obviously Georgia, where we have a really large-scale attempt to basically subvert the political life and the system entirely. And then the last point is, once these principles and interests are established, shared, whether there are also mechanisms that support lasting peace. One thing is generally to kind of have a general framework, but you need to have working mechanisms that would guarantee that you know, peace will be lasting for the next at least 1 or 2 generations, and then these mechanisms enter or transform into a kind of tradition. And once the mechanisms, kind of institutional mechanisms, acquire the quality of tradition, then at this point we can say that the lasting peace is achieved. So from that perspective, we are in a very dangerous situation. Particularly, I also, from the Georgian perspective, I have to highlight that Azerbaijan is missing a unique opportunity in the region, window of opportunity to play a constructive role, not only with regard to Armenia, but increasingly also it is kind of has more demanding position towards Georgia. If you look what President Aliyev was demanding during the conference in Baku, in strong reference to the anti-democratic. Basically, this speech was anti-democratic and attacking Georgian civil society, so which we in Georgia strongly disagree with. And the last point, and I'm done here, with regard to Russian influence in Abkhazia and Ossetia. For us, Ossetia has no relevance whatsoever. This is a basically technical big Russian military base with 15 to 20,000 local residents that even have no even desire to be independent, because they twice during last decades requested Russian state to integrate South Ossetia into Russian state. In Abkhazia, just recently, the Russians still dominated Abkhazians' internal political life, forced upon Abkhaz population the new president. The Russian economic interests will be pushed further in the and Abkhaz will be forced to obey, otherwise there will be price to pay. And for us, for Georgians, this is a clear indication that whether we want to recognize the quality of Abkhaz minority as an independent agent, that this is actually not the truth. They are much more independent. They have much independent voice than the Ossetians. But we all know who is the elephant in the room, and this is Russia. So by that, I will finish, and we will continue tomorrow.
Thank you. Yep, it is working. So many good points are made, so we're in a difficult position. Well, I would say that there is peace. It's Azeri peace. It's what we're seeing, a very consistent process of pacification of Armenia. That's what's happening. Pacification, very similar in many ways what Russia had in mind for Ukraine. Denazification is something that they have in mind. The vision that Azerbaijan has is one of punishing the aggressor, imposing a legal framework, an agreement that will provide Azerbaijan with an ability to take preventive measures to make sure that Armenia never comes back, never stands up, and never challenges the new order that has been imposed. It's the way Azeris are framing this is you're bringing peace through force, and as Professor Asturian mentioned, why wouldn't they? Because they have an amazing counterpart that seems to be agreeing that Armenia was an aggressor, really. Never took an opportunity to bring peace, and now, it's being punished. I think even Pashinyan mentioned that for 30 years we gave them pain, and now maybe for 30 years they will give us pain. So from Azer perspective, because they view international order from different perspective, and as you can see, there was a question about US. They were first there. They were first talking to Trump, very transactional. They know what language to use. They know what buttons to press and what to offer and what to ask for. The Armenian side, I think the problem is that they have no strategy. They just tag along. From Armenian perspective, I think there is an undercurrent of sort of ideological inclination to go for peace and continue with this peace talk, simply because I think it's a result of years of one-sided peace building that has taken place, and it was actually so the Western organizations, I thought that they are bringing peace. There was asymmetric peace building. On one side, it was the Armenian youth, Armenian society being prepared for the concessions and peace, but they had no access to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan was tightly controlled, and they knew what they were doing. They were preparing for war. So I think ironically, what the Armenian government has done, it has increased the risk of pacification or new war, if that's even possible, because I don't think that the plan of taking a breather, recuperating and coming back is going to work, because you are effectively seeing a framework that Armenia will be placed in, where Azerbaijan will have a say in Armenian domestic affairs, in all of its affairs. And that's how you pacify your enemy, and that's what they've done. They have also discovered along the way that you can actually expand your ask and your plans. For Azerbaijan, Armenia is the source of geopolitical potential. That's how it devours and it becomes a mid-level player. And I do agree that Turkey will have, I don't think they will have any influence on them, if not the opposite. But in the short term, I would say that there is a risk of escalation, probably local escalation, just to add the finishing touches. The Armenian government will say, well, we tried our best, but this is what it is, and we have to agree. It seems to be a behavior that they have shown for years now. The other aspect, and I'll finish, is how Armenia perceives international relations. It just keeps talking about international community and dominance of international law. It's as if the rest of the world is passing by and they haven't noticed what's happening globally and the shifts that have happened, and that detachment in some ways from reality also adds to the risks. I think at some point Armenians will get peace, but they will regret for having it because it will not be what they were asking for. And I think in the even medium term, most likely way of finishing sort of the pacification, the region will be weaker Armenia being integrated with Russia even further, because that's how you prevent the resurgence of anything. Because frankly, if any resurgence to happen, I disagree with most of my panelists. I think Russia is here firmly. Armenia would need to have a serious backing of a strategic partner from the West. That's not going to be allowed to Armenia.
Seems to be a consensus here. I will kind of elevate my posturing and say, never mind the short term, Aliyev will never sign a peace treaty. And that's because it's not in his strategic interest. I think there were sort of set of reasons that were given. Some, I think, touched up on it. Some were mostly seemed to be rhetorical. But the evidence, empirical sort of research demonstrates few things. Aliyev invested 20 years of immense capabilities to create the power of despair that he has. So when you ask him for peace, from his lens, you're asking him to abdicate that asymmetry. He's never going to do that. So within the domain of loss, peace for Aliyev is viewed as an act of loss because he's being told to give up a power asymmetry that he's spent so much resources on. So the incentive structure for Azerbaijan is not conducive to signing peace. And it is that dynamic that is going to shape these developments. Second, I'm glad Stepan mentioned it. Conflict proneness of regimes is one component. But to provide an institutionalist assessment, Azerbaijan's institutions under Aliyev have been constructed to have conflict persistence. And so the entire design of the state system, right, feeds off of persistence of conflict with Armenia. You take that away, it is going to create immense institutional problems that would have systemic repercussions for him. So in of itself, that also presents a serious problem. But fundamentally, I think when we look at sort of, the broader approach here, Aliyev is not stupid. He may be a lot of things. I could come up with a nice set of derogatory terms, but he's not stupid. And from his lens, you must be stupid to agree to peace when you basically are able to maintain a severe power disparity. On the other hand, right, when we talk about Armenia's approach, I do disagree with some of the rhetoric or discourse out there that Armenia does not have a strategy or it's not doing anything. When you're procuring weapons that is nearly $2 billion a year, that when you're spending more on security capabilities than you've ever had, this remains Aliyev's biggest concern, that Armenia is attempting to close the asymmetry gap. Okay? And so the only way Aliyev would sign or agree to peace is if Armenia develops a deterrence capacity. Until that happens, Aliyev has no incentive to sign, right? So the whole, Aliyev is evil, he wants revenge, he's a bad guy. And those are not really consistent or empirically driven basis. He has managed to establish himself from his lens as the region's mini hegemon. He has completely ruptured the balance of power and tilted complete to his favor. Why would he give that up? And so within a domain of rational calculus, right, peace remains antithetical to Azerbaijan's strategic interests. And until those interests are reshifted, until the incentive structure is changed, he simply is not going to sign. Because if you were in his place, you wouldn't sign either. So the environment, the situation, I think, is dictating Azerbaijan's aversion to peace.
Well, it's quite rare to have a total consensus on the topic, but here, on this cheerful note,